do. There are times I gotta see so many places in my head, so many places I could be. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. When you tell me that you're gone, I know I've heard it all before. From the memories in your head, you see me running for your door. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. Can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. You can't stop me now. Never gonna hold me down. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for singing that song so well.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm having my nice Milo here in my SDA Q&A cup mug. Welcome, Kevin. My very special guest today is Pastor Kevin Morgan. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Do you have Milo in the States? It's like a hot chocolate, I guess. It might be an Aussie thing, maybe.
It may be here, but I don't get out a lot.
Well, I purchased a bunch of these to sell to help provide income for the show to keep the content going, and we're down to about 2 mugs left. If anyone wants, I won't be doing another run. So there's only 30 in existence with 2 more to go. So if anyone's interested, shoot me a message. And as I said, I have got my special guest, Pastor Kevin Morgan, here today. He's an author, Ellen G. White apologist, and I mean that in a positive way. I'm trying to think of a better phrase, but you appreciate Ellen White, her writings, and you've found a way to be able to answer the critics that is satisfactory to you and a lot of people. And you're also a SDA pastor. You're currently pastoring a church, or what's
Right.
the situation with that?
I'm bivocational. I pastor the church and I also edit books.
Right. Now, you've written several books, and we're going to be talking about them today, and we'll get you to hold them up.
Okay.
Just right at the start, how can people best contact you? Website, YouTube channel, email? What's the best way if people watching today want to send you a message?
Uh, I haven't done this a whole lot to get people to contact me, but I do have a channel on. Let's see if you'll.
Sure. This is the YouTube channel, and I've been
Right.
watching some of your videos this week as well. I think
Yeah,
they're
I've
very,
just
very well
started putting
presented.
stuff up. I mean, I've been working on books mostly, and I wanted to do this. You're the stimulus for my putting this stuff up as videos. I thought the best way to respond to things is to have a whole picture and paint the whole picture. So,
That's
uh,
great. Yeah, and because
I'm,
we do the long form interviews, you get to unpack all different sides. Yeah,
oh yes, yeah.
yeah.
I appreciate you, and I wouldn't have come on here if I thought you were going to just try to pin me to the wall.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. You've mentioned that you've seen a few shows, and we definitely like to. Well, I like to bring on people from all walks of Adventist life, and I'm upfront that I left the church, um, but I obviously still care. You don't just suddenly leave something and not care about the people and family, and a lot of the traditions I still enjoy. Haystacks are still my
You
favorite
do
food.
that in Australia too?
Yes.
All
We like
right.
we like to claim that we invented it.
Could have been. Could have been.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, so perhaps we'll direct people to the YouTube channel. What is it called? I was watching some this morning. I'll
Yeah.
just
Oh,
quickly mention to people.
it's just Kevin Morgan.
Okay, if they look up Pastor Kev, what I did to find it, I just typed in Pastor Kevin Morgan SDA, and it came
Right.
up at the top.
That's my channel, but I've appeared on some other people's programs,
Channels
and
as
you'll
well.
get some of those too.
Yeah, awesome. Just got to get the light going there. Sorry, it was a bit dim. That's a bit better. Right. So I've called the program "The Good Works of Ellen White"
Mm,
because I think you'd heard me say on one of my other programs that Ellen White, her house is just down the road from here. She lived here, I think, from 1891 to 1900, and
right.
her house is literally, maybe 300 meters away from me. My neighbor has her desk that she used to write on.
Oh,
He's
seriously.
he's generational Adventist in the area, and that table has been passed down and was lovingly restored, and so that's literally 20 meters away that way, and the house is 200 or 300 meters the other direction. And yeah, so I said on a show that Ellen White had done a lot of good things in the area here, and how can people kind of balance that notion of someone doing these good things, but a lot of people also bring up criticisms, and we'll talk about this later with plagiarism and various claims that may have been made. So we're going to get into that. I wanted to read a couple of the things that have been said in newspapers and other local articles um, that speak of her positive
Favorably. Yeah.
contribution. And I
Yeah.
wanted to give a plug to, sadly, Marion de Berg has passed away, but
Mm,
she was working at the White Estate here at Avondale, and she's got this great book. If anyone wants to go, you can get it from the ABC store here in Currumbong, and Stories from Sunnyside, Ellen White in Australia, 1891 to 1900. And there's a little blurb up the top there, written by Dr. Alan Lindsay. He's church historian. He was on the Keepers of the Flame video and Tell the World, also the famous Adventist movie. And he wrote, "I've been blessed in reading this fascinating and carefully researched account of Ellen White's time in Australia. He's still alive, and he lives on the same road that Ellen
wow.
White's house on. He's about 500 meters from me.
Oh
So
my.
it's all happening here. We're at this
I
little
am envious, Peter. I am envious.
every
I
weekend. They have tours through the Sunnyside,
mm,
and you're welcome to come and stay. I'll put you up in my little granny flat here, and go up to the White Estate and go and visit the sunny side, and visit some of these locals that are in the area. So I'm going to read now From my mum sent me this morning. Thank you, Heather. So I'll just read them randomly. Just realizing that I may need new
Are
glasses.
these in her handwriting, or are they
No,
transcriptions?
one's literally a picture of a newspaper article, and the
Okay.
others are just typewritten, not in her handwriting. These are
Okay.
things said about her, not her saying things. I'm
Okay.
going to have to just get my other glasses. Excuse me a second.
All right.
I'm getting old, Kevin.
Aren't we all?
Okay. Oh, that's not even much better. Anyway, I'll give it a go. I might just have to expand it as big as possible. Yeah, so this is from a newspaper, and the distribution was quite wide in the area. And the pertinent part of the article is they're talking about Avondale and the settlement here. And Avondale is kind of, what would you say, a hamlet of Currumbong. I mean, usually people don't distinguish the two anymore. They just say Avondale is part of Currumbong.
Because it's merged together.
Yeah, it's like Avondale's where Avondale now University is was called Avondale, but Currumbong was also already here, and it became known as like a separate little town within a town. Ellen White, I might be wrong with this, so people correct me if I am, but Ellen White lived, as I said, just down the road, so she's part of Currumbong, and Avondale is that way, about a kilometre down the road. So,
Wow.
but people now see Avondale as where Avondale College Church is, Avondale University Church, I should say, where Memorial, the Adventist, big Adventist, more conservative church is there. So back then they were calling Avondale a settlement within Currumbong. The settlement was founded by an American widow lady named Mrs. White. That's why I'm clarifying the Currumbong and Avondale. Ellen White didn't settle Currumbong. She settled this little settlement within Currumbong. It is said that she had seen in a dream the place on which she and her followers were to settle, and the section of Currumbong corresponded with the land of her dream. Mrs. White was an accomplished and highly educated lady. I think they got that a bit wrong, but she was definitely widely read anyway and self-educated, and was held in esteem by those outside of her own sect who knew her, SECT. Either her, so they obviously viewed her as a sect, but they're still speaking highly of her. Either her husband or son was the author of one of the standard books of the community. I hadn't heard this before. It's a J.E. White. That's referring to her husband, who was dead by then by at least 10 years. And the book was called The Coming King. Have you heard of that?
That would be James Edson, her son.
Oh, it is her son. Yes, correct. So, yes. And the article was not sure if it's husband or son, but you're right. J.E. White is Edson. So, The Coming King. Have you read that book?
It went through many editions.
Right. And apparently it was very popular here. Most, if not all, of the residents are Americans. So this at the time, maybe. And Mrs. White, after founding the settlement and getting matters in working trim, returned to her native land about 5 years ago. So this article must have been written 1905. The first thing that strikes a visitor is the artistic appearance of her house. There is no mistaking the Avondale cottages. Now, so they'll be referring to her house and also what we used to call Avondale Drive, which was the main road down into the now university, had lots of little cottages. I used to live on one of the houses built in the late 60s, 70s, late 60s, but it was a brick home. But dotted along that drive are these beautiful old little cottages, and they're still there to this day. People are still living in them.
Oh, from that era.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so they're commenting on those cottages and also her house. It would be well if other residents of the district took patterns of them and built similar ones for themselves. So that's one article, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Just getting an insight into the time period and her involvement being nestled in Currumbong. Now, this I think is more recent. I think these are two women that began working at the White Estate up here at Avondale. Megan Skeen and Zoe Cochran, both third-generation Adventists, and they are local names as well. So I'm guessing that they have parents, grandparents that go back to Ellen White's time. Have a deep appreciation and enthusiasm for Mrs. White, but that wasn't always the case. Growing up, they perceived Mrs. White as a distant historical figure placed on a pedestal by many Adventists. As a result, they found it challenging to connect with her. Their attitudes changed, however, after joining the Adventist Heritage Centre team last year. I don't know when this was printed, and getting to know Mrs. White as a woman who went above and beyond to help her local community during the years living in Cooranbong, Australia. I learned about what she did for the community, and for me, actions speak louder than words, said Miss Skeen, a psychology student at the University of Newcastle. She was constantly going out and helping people. She was known as the buggy woman in Cooranbong because she would go around on her one-horse buggy and constantly give out food and clothing to people. Her writings are really important, but I feel we should also focus on how she helped people in the community. And this one, I think, may be from Marion's book. I'm not 100% sure. Early in 1896, Ellen had a family of 12 people living at Sunnyside at her home there. Her parlour saw many visitors come and go, from the sick to many friends, ministers, and even the General Conference president. One of Ellen White's secretaries, Sarah Peck, stated that Sister White was the very soul of hospitality. Visitors were always welcome, and no one ever left her home hungry, not even a professional tramp tramps, of which Australia had a large number in those days. I haven't heard of that term before, professional tramp. Professional homeless person, I think you'd call them in the States. At the time of the Union Conference meetings at Cooranbong in July of 1899, Mrs. White freely invited her house guests to gather mandarins, oranges, and passion fruit from her orchard. Ellen herself liked to keep a simple diet and adhered strictly to 2 meals a day. Their outdoor oven baked the bread for the families of Ellen and son Willie and the Iram James's family. I think he may have helped build that. And I'll read one last one. There's many that I could share, but we're getting the gist of it. John Richard Pocock. Oh, so I had that wrong about the other guy, but that's okay. He was born in 1863 in England. He was a coachmaker and carpenter. He married Charlotte Ann Susan Lowthorpe in 1887. They and their young son Arthur and Charlotte's parents, George and Anne, migrated to Australia during 1889, as did John's brother Herbert. In 1990, John selected a 40-acre farm block in the Hawkesbury district, which is about an hour south of here, by car. He built a small home on a rocky hillside at Calabash Creek near Barowra Waters, and 4 children were born while living there. The Depression in the 1890s made it difficult to obtain much work. In 1895, John was invited to help with the construction of the Sunnyside House, Ellen White's home at Cooranbong in Avondale Road. He continued to work on various other building projects in Cooranbong. He sometimes stayed there during the week and travelled home at weekends. In 1899, John brought his family to live at Cooranbong so he could continue working there, and the children could be educated at the college. They walked 3 miles from their house near Barowra to the railway station, and Mrs. White met them at Dora Creek Station with her horse and buggy. Mrs. White had organised a cottage for them to stay in free of rent, and on their first night there was a terrible storm, so Mrs. White arranged for a nurse to help them, as 2 of the children were feeling unwell. Sadly, a few days later, one of the little boys did pass away, and his grave is his grave is one of the first in the Avondale Cemetery, which is about a kilometre and a half from here. Ellen White wrote concerning the family. Mr. Pocock has 5 very beautiful children. The eldest is 10 years old. Brother Pocock is one of the most conscientious, self-denying, self-sacrificing, uncomplaining men I have seen. And there's other letters that people have found that where people are writing backwards and forwards, and always, she'll be writing to a local plumber or carpenter and saying, "Hey, can you go and help these guys over here?" So these letters are between the various plumbers who still have ancestors living here in Cooranbong today, and they speak very highly of her. So she had a very big impact, and it's interesting that on the Avondale University campus, they've got a retirement village there, a massive church that's definitely more traditional Adventist, massive, like 1,000-seater. And then they've got the Avondale College Church, Avondale University Church, which also holds 900 to 1,000 people. Big church, but it's way more, we're trying to progressive, I guess. So Des Ford taught there. So at that time when I was a little boy growing up, we literally lived smack bang in the middle, halfway between these two churches. And a lot of my relatives went to the conservative one, but there were lots of friends and family that were scholars and academics at the other church. So right in where I am is kind of ground zero for a lot of that kind of thing. Des Ford went on from here to do his work and whatnot all around the world.
PUC.
PUC, where the famous forum meeting occurred. So I've been right in the heart of both sides of the argument, and I know that's a bit of a long introduction we've had there, but I really wanted to create a sense of this idea of Ellen White doing these good things. And by all accounts, she was well received, liked in the community, and went about what she did quite happily. It wasn't like just propaganda. She was quite into it.
She even considered staying in Australia beyond because she loved it.
Yes.
She loved it. And when she left, she was given a really unique parting gift that people wrote messages to her, and I'd love to see that in person, but I've seen pictures of it, and it's just very, very dear, the things that people said. And Australia, as you mentioned, was going through a depression at the time.
Yeah.
But it was also a time of advancement of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It had just gotten started. And I've done, some reading on this in preparing, in doing my research on the Desire of Ages. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight is false impressions that people have had. And I have to say, I've had some of them myself that as I've continued to look at it. But a lot of things happened there in Australia, remarkable things. And one of the stories that I heard also that goes along with some of the things that you've been reading, there were some folks there that knew that she was suffering with arthritis. If you see some pictures of her, her hands are kind of stiff even. And the first year that she was there, she accomplished very little because she was suffering so much with her arthritis and was bedfast almost. And so some very kind people bought her a chair that would be more comfortable for her. They had to bolster her up for her writing chair. She had a little lap board that she put down, and she would sit with her arms bolstered up. And so they bought her this really nice chair, which she thanked them for, but sold it so that she could use it to help some people and also to open up a new church.
Yeah. I'm interested in where you and I would converge, but also separate our thoughts on this topic. And I'm interested in you expanding more on your research of these good things that you just shared a story there. Share some more. I'd like to hear some more. But I've come to the point where I'm not trying to even criticize or condemn her, especially with these good things that she did. I think that's fantastic. But I've also been able to reconcile that for me personally, I don't believe she was a prophet. I'm less likely to say that she was, manipulating the situation, though some have presented cases where they think she was.
Mhm.
I personally think that she did believe it. I've done a lot of work in the music industry and have met a lot of people that I would say are like Ellen White, where they're famous. Um, they they almost believe their own press in a way that not in a negative way, but they just, they are well liked. They do lots of stuff. But I've noticed another phenomenon where the fans of these people love telling the good stuff they do, and the good
Sure.
stuff they do is valid, and they do it genuinely. So I'm not saying
Right.
that anyone's trying to be lying here, but I'm saying there's an interesting milieu that gravitates around people that are kind of the stars. Like I've done a lot of interviews with people that knew Des Ford, um, and he has a little bit of that around him, where people love talking about, oh yes, Des. I'd meet up with Des and we'd go for a long walk, and oh, that Des, he just gave so much to that local community, but they have equal dark attacks on them as well. Des will have people say, oh yes, I was in a room and someone was devil possessed and they said it was the demon of Desmond Ford, and
My,
or that the demon had also possessed Des Ford or something like this. So I'm just wanting to add to this component of this conversation is that I believe this something happens around charismatic, famous people that almost has
Mhm.
nothing to do with them.
Sure.
And I believe Des and Ellen were great people contributing a lot to society, but they seem to gravitate around them people that love putting them on the pedestal and people that love tearing them down. And so
Yeah.
I've come to that converging point where I think she was charismatic, famous, had lots of great things to say and do, but I don't think she was a prophet. I don't think God spoke to her. I think she interpreted it that way. Whereas
Mhm.
you have come to the point, and from watching some of your videos, you've gone, oh, this is challenging me a bit, but you've reconciled these stories, the goodness of what she does, and that helps you to then go a different direction to me and say, I feel that she was a prophet or a messenger, or that she did commune with God and he gave her visions. I'm
Mhm.
interested in, at some point in this conversation, wondering why that happens. Why do two people go two separate ways? And
It's a good question.
yeah.
In my last video, I can only tell my story, but I did spend a long period of time back in 2006, 2007, dialoguing with former Adventists who uh, mostly were talking about doctrinal issues and differences there. But occasionally we would talk about experience, and the experiences definitely put a cast on how you perceive Adventism and Ellen White and other people. Now,
Mm,
um, in my last video, the last thing that I did was to make an appeal, recognizing that there are some people who have been mistreated by well meaning but not very nice Adventists.
mm,
There are people that have been turned off for different reasons. One lady that I communicated with for a long time um, told about her experience with her grandmother, who in her mind was like right next to Ellen White. This is, and she got pregnant. I think she was married. I didn't prod into the story, but her. So I don't think it was an issue of not being married, but her grandmother was aghast that she was going to have a child, and that's what shaped her entire
yeah,
view of Ellen White, because she associated it again with Ellen White.
yeah,
One of the things that I have discovered, and this is what I'd like to share in part tonight or today, where you are,
yeah.
uh, is to see that some of the people who are her groupies didn't see things like she did at all.
Mm,
And so they shaped some of the negativity that people had about her. So just I've been looking at different phases of history, and just trying to understand Ellen White, not from my view of her superimposing, but looking at the evidence. I have gathered, as far as her as a prophet, I have gathered every statement that I can find where people describe seeing her in vision. What specifically
Mm,
did they recognize, and how did it impact people, and so on. And so I've
mm,
gathered a whole bunch of that. I'm working on a new book that will be entitled Glory, 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 and there's a whole section where it
mm.
deals with those things. But I was digging through. I'm creating what has never been done before, and my kids said, "Really, Dad?" Nobody has ever attempted to make an exhaustive list of all of her visions.
Interesting. They've just
You'll he-
estimated, haven't they? Even Arthur White just did the old estimation.
and I think he's way overshooting,
Oh,
as far as I
100%.
can tell.
Yeah, yeah.
He
And there
was.
was a
It was
time where
based.
she kind of stopped altogether too, near the end.
Well, her last vision is pretty late, but the visions, the later visions, are of a different sort. The early visions were
Yeah,
public. The later visions were visions of the night.
yeah.
So anyway, I have attempted to create this list, and so far I've only gotten so far in it, up until the 1850s, and because it corresponds with the book that I'm writing about
Yeah.
that period.
Okay, interesting.
So in doing that, I begin to learn a little bit about what's going on and the interaction that's going on with in response. Why would she have a vision at a certain time? What bearing did it have on what was going on in the church, and those kinds of things? And I got into something that I had never really looked at before, but you may have heard of the messenger party. The
No.
messenger party. It's a deal here in the States, but it was a group of Adventists who left pretty early. It was, and they formed their own denomination
Right.
as a result.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
And
hung on to her as a prophet and guiding light.
no, rejecting her as a prophet.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But hung
And
on to certain Adventist ideologies?
the Sabbath, and they would say, really, mostly about the Sabbath. And I have met with the church that formulated as a result of that separation. They
Interesting.
invited me to come to Orlando, where they had a big convention. Young pastor there, was just really an exciting time to meet with these different people who had. It's kind of like cousins of Adventists,
Yeah.
and we would talk. Their name is the Church of God Seventh Day,
Right.
and the
I have
big
heard of those, yeah.
the
And
the
they're a
ch-
direct link from the messenger group that broke away.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, and they are also the forebears of the Worldwide Church of God,
Right. Yeah.
because it came out of them. Well,
Right.
it was fascinating to meet them and to talk with them, but that messenger party, I had, it was kind of in the back of my mind. I'd known something about it, but I found 3 issues online of the messengers, of it was called the Messenger of Truth, and I wanted to hear from them. How did they see what was going on? Um, did they understand things in a different way? And so
Yeah.
I transcribed all of those articles, and I
Wow.
started identifying the people who were involved, and so on. And the first 2 that left started this paper and started the movement, and the reason that they separated was over Ellen White, which at first they said, "Oh yes, she's right." See, she had a vision about a woman within the church who had some harsh words with a neighbor, and one of these people's daughter, his name was Case, his daughter had heard this woman use a certain word that's pretty common today, but not very nice, and had repeated it. And she was certain that she had called her the witch word that starts with a B.
Right.
But the woman said that she had just used the word witch. And the church was in agreement when Ellen White had a vision at first that there was something wrong. This lady should be corrected. And oh yeah, they were on team Ellen White about that. She needed to be corrected. In fact, needed to be churched, as they say sometimes around here, disfellowshipped.
Mm.
And that's what they wanted to do. Well, she had another vision. She said she didn't use the word that the daughter thought she did. But that wasn't the main difference between the two. And this is one of the aspects that I began to see as I looked at different circumstances. And I want to read one quotation to you where it epitomizes this. But the difference between these people was that Ellen White, though she wanted discipline from the church, wanted to do so with a redemptive purpose, not to push the person away, but to correct their behavior and get them on track. And the two that left, who were corrected because of their zealousness to prosecute this woman, started their own group because they were corrected. And I started seeing examples. So I just started writing down some of the instances. One I discovered in a book that was written, this one here, by G. Tom Carter. And this describes John and Judith, and they are from the Rust family, and they went down and began work in Texas in the 1870s. And I ran into this because I was trying to find where another pioneer who had gone down there to work with them. This was the beginning. Let me back up here. I was working on this book, Journeying to the Same Heaven, which is about Ellen White, the Civil War, and the goal of post-racialism, which has been put on hold in the last decade or so. But I wanted to know something about Joseph Clark, and because he wrote a lot about the Civil War, and he was one of the first to go down into Texas to work with the freedmen after the Civil War in the 1870s. Now, if you know your history, the 1860s is when the church was formed, when the Civil War was fought. 1865, they determined that they were going to go into the South. And so they promptly didn't go into the South. And that was one of the questions I needed to answer. Well, when they finally did, they went into Texas in 1870s. And there was this story that came out about the Rusts and Joseph Clark and Elder Kilgore, who was a pretty prominent leader in the church and in the South. But she sent a message that was supposed to be a correction for a brother Baylor, who was a blind man. And she was asking for them to address a situation. And they did a pile-on. Bam! Take all of his responsibilities away from him, and just treat him as harshly as they could. And she said, "This is not what I had in mind." So let me read you what she said. "I am now becoming convicted that I have made a mistake in specifying wrongs existing in my brethren. Many are so constituted that they will take these wrongs and deal so severely with the wrongdoer that he will have no courage or hope to set himself right. And this mismanagement will ruin a soul. They, knowing the things I know, treat the erring in altogether a different manner than I would. Hereafter, I must exercise more caution and wish that we had much more of the Spirit of Christ and a great deal less of self and less of human opinions. If we err, let it be on the side of mercy rather than on the side of condemnation and harsh dealing. When I read that in this book, I started noticing other instances that were the same, and hearing stories that didn't jive with my view of Ellen White, because the people that I knew that were very careful about the way they ran their lives kind of lined up with what the little fellow said who went to the prayer meeting. He prayed, "Dear Lord, please make the bad people good and the good people easier to live with."
Yeah.
And I noticed that. I was drawn to the liberal-hearted people within the church who were kind, but I respected the people within the church who did things right as far as what the church teaches and lived up to it. And I thought, why can't there be a uniting of those two things?
Mm.
And what I've discovered as I began to read these things and hear these stories is that Ellen herself was like that.
Yeah. I think that's a very important little thing you've raised there. I've discovered, and perhaps only recently, after being a fifth generation Adventist, leaving 7.5 years ago, starting SDAQ&A 3, 4, 5 years ago,
Mm.
interviewing over 80 people in season 2 about Glacier View and Des Ford, quite clearly knowing what the traditional Adventist believes, where their stance is, but I've only just realised in the last few weeks that bouncing off of what you just said, Ellen White was like that. She wanted to kind of almost bring both sides together.
Mm-hmm.
What I've discovered, my long way of saying it, is that both sides, say the progressive Adventist and the traditional Adventist, both actually love Ellen G. White. So maybe they can come together based on Ellen G. White, because I am amazed when I've criticized Ellen White, when I've had guests on that criticize Ellen White, I'm amazed at how those that love Des Ford, some of the more progressive Adventists, how upset they are with me about that.
Mm-hmm.
I tended to think that, people are going to see Ellen White like I do, good person, did great stuff for the community, false prophet. No, the progressive Adventists, they don't want to put her on a pedestal.
No.
They don't want her driving the car, but they want her in the car still.
Yeah.
And so the other things that have been dawning on me is that there are two churches in one, possibly split in after Glacier View, the 5 years following that. And I believe that each of those two groups, generally speaking, have got many subgroups. But I believe we've got the traditional Adventists, the progressive Adventists. They need to somehow not leave the church, but somehow define themselves better, the progressive Adventists. And I like to call them gospel Adventists, not to say the traditional don't have the gospel, but just by way of clearly saying this is a separate movement. So what you've said there has only just really hit me in the last week or two. Ellen White may truly have wanted both sides to be like you did this. And I think that what actually holds both sides together is Ellen White.
Interesting.
But I still think that the traditional Adventist has very clearly defined who they are. You just know your Doug Batchelors and your Dave Ashricks, and you know who the conservative ones are. But the progressives, and I'm coming to a point here, have not been good at defining themselves. They don't have real strong leadership. They're not motivated to to hold fast. They tend to have, back in the day, they'd send little secret tapes to each other of, the latest Des Ford meeting or whatever. And they meet still in little Sabbath school classrooms and have what I think are great conversations. I would be, if I was an Adventist, I'd be one of those. Why is that, do you think? When they do have such a love of the Sabbath and Ellen White, they could really coexist under the same Adventist umbrella. Why are they so scared to create a more defined movement within a movement? Well, I rambled on then, but I my new
you're
thought.
stretching beyond my pay grade on this one, because I haven't really discussed it with people. Although a lot of my friends, I think, would tend to be they would be conservative in culture. They
I'm not meaning standards. I'm
right.
kind of meaning the three angels message versus the Ellen White in the front seat as opposed to Ellen White in the back seat.
Yeah. Well, temperaments are going to dictate a lot of that, because there are some people that are more open-ended. I pastor a church with people that are kind of open-ended in some ways, but we've had some people that were very, very conservative, and the members said, "Come on, join with us." And some would have come, and others have too strong, too brittle a hold on certain teachings, whatever they might be, and they may be things that are even beyond standards of Adventism. So but we would welcome them, and we do welcome them, and as long as they're not twisting the church in pieces, they can hold a lot of different views.
That's a rare thing, though. Like growing up, even we knew, as I mentioned earlier, we had the Memorial Church at the end of the road and the College Church at the other end, and one was Norm Young, Des Ford, all these guys, and the other church had the real. But by conservative, I don't mean politics or lifestyle or that standards. I mean theologically speaking, and they existed because they were able to hold their people within their church. But all the other local churches all around Australia, and what I gather all around America too, and around less so in Europe perhaps, but the churches would have these two groups and they'd split. They'd be warring at each other. So the reason I'm talking about this, and I liked how you said that Ellen White kind of wanted that. She wanted the cohesion between the two groups. The reason I'm talking about that is because I think both sides hinder each other, generally speaking, around the globe. And the more conservative traditional Adventist wants to, kick out the progressives, and the progressives are often quiet because, honestly, their jobs are often in jeopardy if they speak up too much. So I'm seeking a solution, I guess, in a weird way. And even though I've left, if the church resolves it, I'm not going to come back. But I'm fascinated, and I can't even explain why I am. I just am. So that's a good enough reason. And I just think, from an outsider's view now, I just see each side holding each other back. And I'm interested in just discussing. You said it's not above your pay grade for this conversation, but I'm only just thinking about this stuff now too.
Yeah.
And something you said really galvanized that. So I wonder if I've tended to think, and I still do, they're chalk and cheese. They're never going to agree, but maybe they could run two separate conferences or something like that.
Well, they do, like you say, they have a church on one end of the road and a church at the other, or they run two services in a larger church,
Yeah, or in a town to go to one church, not the other, kind of thing, and but they still hold each other back.
We in so many ways we are team sports. We join a team. I was just talking with my wife about how that at a certain point I wanted to be a good conservative, and so I took my cues from other conservatives. But I had this thing in the back of my mind that that the good people sometimes were the liberal-minded people. They were truly liberal. Now there are people that are liberal-minded that if you're not liberal-minded, they will crucify you, and that's, to my way of thinking, not a good liberal. That's as bad as a conservative who's forcing their way on other people. But seeing these different groups in different ways of looking at it, I met some people at a place called Wildwood. I don't know if you've heard of that
Yes,
here in
we
the
were talking
States.
about that in my last interview. We were discussing that with Brian Newman. He was talking about when he used to work for Amazing Facts. Oh, is it Amazing Facts?
He was an evangelist.
Yeah, and he left the church,
Right.
and he was talking about how he once aligned with that church you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're,
Well,
they're very conservative.
it's more than a church. It's a health institution.
Yes.
And
that group of
and
people.
and it's not too far from our college in near Chattanooga.
Yeah.
So I went there for visits a couple of times when I was going through school, and I met a teacher there who said, we need to be liberal conservatives. And then he fleshed out what that meant. And by that he meant having clear standards about how you live your life, but being liberal-minded with others to allow them to come to understand things. I think a lot of go ahead.
No, I agree with you, and I think that I've just been talking to people that Des Ford was quite conservative, but he had
Oh, yeah.
liberal notions of, like, to be honest, I don't think you can really, like, well, I won't even go there, but we're not like there's this notion of conservative and liberal, and the Adventists somehow finding this cohesion.
Right.
And with your comment about Ellen White wanting that as well, I'm wondering if there's a pathway to that. But I don't think it can happen if both see themselves as not being separate. I find so much when I talk to, we'll call them progressive Adventists for this interview, and traditional Adventists, forget liberal, conservative. There's so many cross-wave confusions with that.
Right.
They still see themselves like one side, the traditional Adventists, they see them and us. It's us and them. The liberals love going, hey, my fence is big enough for you. Come in, we accept the traditional, and they're more at least open to that, and I've heard Larry Gerrity talk about the bigger fence, and Bill Johnson saying the big tent kind of thing. I personally think stay under the brand of Adventists, but have two tents, two separate fenced off areas. The two groups trying to work together are like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses trying to cohese. That's perhaps not a good example. I love the way
they both know how to knock on a door.
knock on doors. Yeah. I love how the Catholics model operates, where they are definitely united under the banner of Catholicism and one leader up the top there. I'm not talking about whether I agree with I'm talking about how the system works. I'm not talking about agreeing with their theology. They branch off into orders. So the one order is distinct from the other order. They're not trying to make them work together. And the one thing I would like to hope that I'm kind of making Adventists think about that's a unique thing is that they don't see themselves as a unique two separate orders. As soon as I say there's two churches in one, oh, no, there's 7 churches. We've got this and that. Yeah, okay, fine. We know that generally speaking, everyone's different. But there are two groups, generally speaking, that have subgroups, and they are two very separate orders within Adventism. And I just think I'd love to see them come together for Ellen White, come together for the Sabbath, but stop trying to either push each other apart or make it work. It's never going to work.
Yeah.
People watching this in 40 years' time, if it's still on YouTube, know 2 things. Christ hasn't returned, and 2, these two groups are still not getting on well.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of looked at Adventists as always being kind of individualists, and that's why we're going to have unique kinds of things. We there are within the church group thinkers, that like to fit in with the group, but to attract new people, you have to be willing to be a little bit out of sync with other people. And so, our early pioneers, a lot of them, I mean, they had some tough differences of opinion, and it was pretty harsh at times. But that's kind of the nature of being willing to do something different from the rest of society.
I would suggest, though, that, and I agree with you, the Adventist Church has like constantly been, hey, we're at loggerheads, we don't agree. And the assumption is that, oh, but they worked through it and they've been come to the other side. They haven't. There's just a history of coming together at loggerheads. There's no resolution to the other side of it. Most other churches, Catholics, Protestants, have reached some kind of agree to disagree. Anglicans, higher Anglicanism, lower Catholics, the different orders, Southern Baptists versus Baptists. But they still call themselves Baptists. Adventists just have this series of head-butting conflicts from the beginning of Adventism to right now with Ted Wilson and the compliance document and all that sort of stuff. But they proudly say that, see, we've been able to, we're a distinct group that has these huge clashes. And I go, yeah, and then what? Oh, well, we have a time where we don't do anything, and then we clash again. There's no resolution to be proud of, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, if you want that in spades, you go to the little church that I told you about.
Right, yes.
They gave me, their history was not as thick as this book. And it was constant battling over issues and doctrines. And I got my ears filled with, the Wednesday crucifixion group, King James only people. There were, and these are, big important things. And they saw me as an ally, just because I was listening. And they defended their position quite well, but they have fought and just barely moved back together. And one statement, this, because we're talking about Ellen White in this discussion, I sat down at lunch with the leader who had invited me to come. I was there to talk about the Sabbath because we all agreed on that. They still kept the Sabbath. Okay. And so that was what my seminar was about. But we were talking about the development of the church and how that their identity is still tied to the Seventh-day Adventists. They say, oh, they're always confusing us with you. And I said, well, they don't confuse us with you. We're confused with Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or something else for different reasons. So we were talking about the development of their church, and I asked them about, do they have schools? Well, if you're a pastor in that church, you have to go to another school to get your pastoral training because they didn't have any schools for their pastors. And, well, did they have any institutions, other schools for children? No, didn't have that. Did they have any hospitals or any medical facilities? No, definitely not that. That's later on past when they split with us. So do they have any printing presses? Do they have any? No, they don't have any of that. And so one thing after another, they have their churches and they have a wide variety. There were people there with things on their heads. There were people there that look like Muslims to me. And, very different groups of people. Really, the only thing that was in common was that they worshiped on the Sabbath. And I was talking about, well, the reason why we have these certain things is because at certain points in our history, Ellen White nudged the church. I gave a sermon about this a couple of weeks ago, and I referred to her as a reminderer. She would remind us of principles. She would remind us of truth. She would remind us of our purpose. She would, like a mother does with her kids. and that role was really what kept us together. Often you will hear when we had some heretical issue or difference of interpretation of prophecy or whatever, her primary goal, even in attempting to get things together, was press together, press together, press together.
Mhm.
I presented this in one of the videos that you may have caught up with it by now, but I talked about the health issues and about pork eating. And my friend Ron Grable has done an excellent research on that. It was the first one that I had read about how they came to it. It is not like you would assume it was. It did not originate with taking Leviticus and following it directly. It didn't come like that. You have to read the paper. We don't have time to go into it in detail here. But there was an early vision that she had addressing the Haskells who had given up pork and were trying to push that on others. And I don't know to what degree. Maybe they were friendly about it. I don't know, how much. But Ellen White said, if God wants us to give up pork, he will reveal it. That wasn't the word she used, but that's what it meant. Reveal it to more than 2 or 3. And that would, and so I started thinking, yeah, even in that issue, her intent for the church was to move together, not to move so fast and to make changes, with everybody pretty much in that world, except for a few little exceptions like Bates and the Haskells. Most everybody ate pork. I mean, there's a story about the pay for James and Ellen. They were given a half a hog, and that was their pay. I mean, they ate plenty of hog in their day.
Yeah.
And so, how do you make that change as a whole group? It took thinking about it, writing about it in the Review and Herald, and then she had the Otsego vision, where she said, we have a responsibility to take care of our health. And so that provided some guidance, but it didn't spell everything out all at once. It wasn't from on high. It was a process that brought the whole church along together.
Yeah. Yeah, I like those things you're saying there. I wonder though, if you look back, that all the nudging and the motherly contribution she had, it's literally not successful. If the Adventist church is to be the remnant church, this special last church for the last days, why does it look the same as, if not worse, than most other denominations? In fact, some other denominations have had leaders that have nudged them, and they have managed to coexist and work quite well. Yeah, there's problems with every movement.
Oh yeah.
But there's some Christian movements that, they go along fine. Adventists,
Well,
like,
well,
look at Ellen White
nudging.
Wagner and Jones in 1888 and nudging the church there. A few minutes later, 1891's there, and she's nudged out to Australia. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that she was politically moved out of the States.
And not just for the righteousness by faith, but also because of what she was promoting within the work within the Freedmen and her son. That's another story. Amazing story.
Tell us a little bit about that. I haven't heard that. Just give us a quick summary on that one.
Well, I wasn't aware of it until I read a book by a professor at Oakwood College. And when I started looking at it, that's kind of, this book covers way too much, but it's because all of these issues are interrelated. But the Sepulveda, Professor Sepulveda, pointed out that she was encouraging people to go work in the South and to treat the Black brethren as equals, to treat them and initially to have congregations that were fully mixed, and some of the first churches were. And then that kind of fell apart because of different political different issues. And one of the great stories is that Ellen White was inviting her son, the one that you referred to, James Edson. We know him mostly as Edson, named after his dad, which is kind of problematic because he and his dad had some difference. Willie was much more favored than Edson, and Edson had his struggles. He wanted to follow in his dad's footprints, but he was not as astute in business as his dad, and so he was constantly having reverses, and eventually he separated from the church, and he was in businesses up in Michigan.
Edson did.
Edson, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And he was he was mostly, it was printing. A lot of his work was in publishing, which he came back around and used those skills. Another one of his ventures was building boats. He built the flatboats that would go down the Mississippi. He was in that. He failed at both of those. His mother bailed him out. And she wrote him when she was in Australia, inviting him to come on down. And when I read these letters, at first they weren't. I read his letters first to her, and it seemed like he would start almost every paragraph. Now, mother. It was interesting because he was kind of holding her at arm's length, and I read them on these reels. I was given permission by a brother who had access to them before they have been. Now they're released, but I read these and read hers, that side, and then I read hers, and I just could feel this pathos as she was appealing. Son, God's got a plan for your life. He wants you in his service, and she was appealing to him like you would for an evangelistic meeting for people to come forward. It was so tender and earnest and tender the way she spoke to him, and eventually he had a religious experience with Christ that had been missing. And then he said, well, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And he read this little pamphlet that she had written before she went to Australia, which is today published under the title The Southern Work. But most of it had to do with working with the freedmen, also working with the Southerners as well. But there were complicating issues after the war. And if I go into that, it'd be kind of lengthy, but there was resentment for the carpetbaggers coming into the South, and most Adventists were Northerners. Right. So anyway, he decided, this is what God's calling me to. And so he said, well, how do I do it? Well, one of his adventures was in building boats. So he built a boat inside of his house. Then he had to tear out the wall to finish it out. And then he had this boat, and he didn't have a captain, but he had a young black man who knew the river. So he was qualified, but not technically qualified. So they came down the Mississippi with this fellow. They were fined for not having a pilot, which they finally got a pilot. And then he took the boat down into not Tennessee, not Texas, but Yazoo, Mississippi, the deepest, darkest part of the South. That's where he went, and that's where he started. And there are amazing stories that come out of that adventure. But it was that pamphlet, those counsels that Ellen White had written before she went, and that was also problematic and could have been part of the motivation for sending her down there. But there was we can guess about all of that, and there may be some truth to it, but Australia was also just a brand new place that had just recently had people coming in the 1880s, and had started different kinds of work in Australia, and they thought, if she goes there, she will give an encouragement to the work like nothing else. And it was true.
Mm.
And it was true.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I'd still say that if the Adventist Church is the remnant,
Mm.
it's not really showing itself as being anything different to anything else. Plenty of churches, denominations have good people, have inspiring people, have people that do good works for their community.
Sure.
But having said that, there's nothing wrong with having a grandiose idea of maybe, there can be some kind of not restitution or reconciliation, but maybe some kind of pathway forwards for the Adventist Church with these two, generally speaking, groups at each other's throats or pushing each other away. So I just want to say that in the sense that in the background, if anything pops up in your mind that goes, hey, this might be a suggestion, you can let us know.
I worked with a wonderful fellow. Let me get his book here off my shelf. Two books, and he had this vision of uniting. He saw, as I've heard some others talk about, that we actually need both conservative and liberal, in the sense that conservative keeps you on track, following certain principles, and liberal in the sense that it's adapting to new situations, and so it flexes who you are a little bit in that way.
I think that is 100% true, that we need, as defined that you just said,
Mm-hmm.
every group needs that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that gospel Adventism and traditional Adventism are so unique theologically that each of those groups needs to have conservative liberal, but they are so different that they are going to continue to the end of time hindering each other. Since leaving the church, a lot of people are way more honest with me. I walk down the street, and before it was, hi, how are you going? And they'd kind of see that if you're someone involved with the Adventist church in this area, which when growing up, that was quite a big number, you were treated with kind of a distance.
Sure.
But a respect. But it was kind of what I realize now. They'll see me and they just, hey, how you going, Pete? And they're way more honest with me. So they're not distant anymore, but they're not polished nice to me either. And they view Adventists as, they'll always say this, oh, lovely people. I've got some Adventist neighbors, lovely, lovely people. But boy, their religion is so ridiculous. It's confusing. It's quackery. They have nothing nice to say about Adventism as a theological, ideological movement. So, tick, Adventists, great. You've got great people, great food, haystacks. You've got great schools, great, hospitals, but you're not doing your job presenting yourself as some kind of cohesive ideology that makes sense. And I think it's because they're confused because of these two movements in one. And I think people have been trying to, like the traditional Adventists are trying to kick out the progressive Adventist, and the progressive Adventist lays its claim to its birthright on various nebulous reasons as well. But the traditional Adventist birthright is, I think clearly Adventist doctrine. The gospel Adventist is definitely a different theology. It's very different. They're never going to come together. But I don't think they should split. But I think they need to define themselves as two separate movements.
You raise things. I am curious about you, and I would be asking you questions, but you've asked me on here to deal with certain subjects. So, because you're a curiosity, and your view is a curiosity, because it sounds like it comes from a really good place, and that you care about this people, even though you're not part of this people.
Yeah. And and it's a funny kind of show, really, where I should just sit back and listen, but I end up putting my 2 cents worth in. But
It's
that's
your show.
part of the reason is it's a long form conversation, and we're having
Right.
a conversation. So a conversation is a two-way thing. And thanks for saying what you said there. I have often been a kind of person that likes to observe what's going on. And you look at the world and you'll see Ukraine, Russia, Palestine, Israel, my two daughters fighting each other, Adventists fighting. It's a natural human condition to be offended
Sure.
by other people, to walk out on them, to start something new, to divorce, break up, fight, don't speak, block on Facebook. It's a normal human condition. But if
Absolutely.
Adventists are making a claim that they are remnant, something special, unique is happening within Adventism, I think it needs to be seen by the observer on the outside. And I guess as a kind of not a warning, but as a lot of people have said, oh, you can't help the church from the outside. You've got nothing good you can say if you're on the outside. Well, it turns out you can actually see it better. You can kind of see what's going on in a way that I never saw when I was a member.
I think you probably have more influence than you realize. Anyway, I just to refer to Leroy Moore.
Oh yes, back to that book. Yeah,
This was the book I worked with him on this, and it's
he's an
kind of his
Adventist author,
thesis.
is he?
Yeah, he's passed away, but he was and he had a role at Glacier View. If
Oh,
you dig in,
really?
you will know that he was
What was his name again?
Leroy Moore.
Mm.
Some people might pronounce it Leroy, but that's not how he said it.
Wow.
And so then I helped him with another book, which was the last book that he ever did, and they're available. But this was not my vision of it. But whoever had it published changed it and wanted it to look like a monogram, so they put a plain cover on it. But the title is intriguing: "The Power of Humility."
Yeah.
And the subtitle is "What You Do When You Are Right." And this is about Jones and Wagner.
Wow.
And
Boy,
it's a
interesting.
good read because he understood, as I have tried to describe here, what Ellen White was attempting to do
Yeah.
in bringing people together. And anyway, these are influential for me. Another thing that was influential to me, and this is something that you were alluding to earlier, that before we came online, the work that I did that resulted in this book.
Now this is the Fred
more,
Veltman secretary one.
This is the Fred Veltman secretary one.
Not to be confused with I was Canwright's secretary.
Right. And I'm working on that too. So maybe we can talk about that on another one.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'd love that.
Yeah. But this book was, in brief, I had been thinking about what has changed Adventism, that we have a sense, we have a lack of cohesive identity. And this was from the 80s on.
100%.
And I could tell you my story. It probably interlocks with your story in that period of time. But I was talking with the lady who's on the back of the book that I worked with, and she said, well, I thought that the issue of plagiarism had not been properly dealt with, that it still existed, and that it had not been responded to appropriately. I know there were efforts that
That's
were
what
made.
she said, did you say, or what you said?
This is my thinking.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I talked to her, and she said, well, I have a manuscript that I can't get anybody to edit because everybody's got their own thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're an academic, you've got to publish your own stuff. People, so she couldn't get anybody. I was her pastor.
Mm.
So it was remarkable because I thought this is something that I really would like to study. And so she had her manuscript, and that's what this first book is mostly hers. But then I added some things to it. And then she eventually said, "You're not my editor, you're my co-writer."
Yeah.
So that's why I got billing, because of her. And she's a very, very dear lady. And I talked to her not too long ago. She's out on the West Coast. As she moved over back to the West Coast, because she was at PUC during that time, and you can break in anytime here if you got a question about.
I was just going to say, it'd be great to have an interview with you and her on the program one day and talk about how that all came about. And interesting too that you had this idea that it was an unresolved kind of conversation, the plagiarism. And what we're going to do is just pause. Don't lose that thought. We're going to come back after a short break, and we'll continue with that. Something I've done today, which I don't normally do, is I've hardly entered into the questions. I've realized that they distract me too much. And so what we're going to do is come back. We're going to look at some of the questions and comments. We're going to unpack a little bit more about Fred Veltman's secretary, and then I want to chat a little bit about this idea that we raised right at the start, where, you know, people that are kind of rock stars, they have this good and bad comments grow around them, almost separate to them. It's like a phenomenon. And those that want to hold up the rock star talk about all the great things they did, and those that want to tear them down, they talk about all the bad stuff. And it's almost like a sociological kind of thing that humans do, and you could analyze human behavior, I think, in this regard to famous people. Yeah. So we're going to come back. A lot of people, thank you, have said they enjoy the song I play in the break here. It's called Never Be the Same, and you can listen to it for free if you go, actually not that one, this one here. Just go to Spotify and look up Peter Dixon Band, not just Peter Dixon. There's other Peter Dixons out there. Peter Dixon Band, Standing at the Cross, and you can listen to all my songs from that album, which are very similar to Never Be the Same. Or if you wanted to be really supportive, you can go to this one. Where is it? It's on here somewhere, I think. I don't have it listed, but if you go to iTunes and just look up Never Be the Same Peter Dixon Band, I think it's there as well. And for $1, you can support what I do. iTunes takes 60% of that, but anyway. So we're going to come back very soon, and here's Never Be the Same. I'll play that in the background. We'll be back in 5 minutes or so, and my very special guest today is Pastor Kevin Morgan. I'm enjoying our conversation. I hope you are too, Kevin. It's just fascinating, and I feel like we've uncovered some really interesting insights, and we'll be back in 5 or 6 minutes to talk more. See you then.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will will never be the same, will never be the same. Oh, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello, and we're back. Hey, Kevin.
Nice music, man. Nice.
Thank you very much. As I
Yeah.
said earlier in the little plug, if people go and they can click the QR code there, or simply go to Spotify, Standing at the Cross, Peter Dixon Band, and there's a bunch of about 10 songs recorded about 20 years ago. I can't believe it. 2004-ish.
Wow.
And I want to thank people too for donations this last week. I had $25 donated to the cause. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to make a donation to what I'm doing, there's a QR code up the top here. Or you can go to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. And even $25 really goes a long way to paying for platforms like Restream that I have to use. I'm still paying for season 1 to be kept up on the podcast there. That's about $27 a month as well. So thank you very much for those donations. I really appreciate that. So as I said, I'm talking to my very special guest today, Kevin Morgan, and I'm just... where we go? It's funny, Kevin, when people click a QR code, I don't know if it pops up your end, but it comes up with little sparkly stars up the top that someone's clicked. So it's nice to know people are going to listen to the music there. That's great.
Yeah.
So Kevin is an author, Ellen G. White apologist in the best sense of the word, and SDA pastor. And we're having a great conversation today, confirming that people with diverse views can actually get on well. We're going to come back to that story about Fred Veltman's secretary and your connection with her, and a huge amount of positive things that grew from that. And one thing that popped into my mind when she offered to give you credit, I thought Ellen White should have maybe given Marion Davis co-author credit for Desire of Ages. She certainly did a lot of editing and help with that book. But before we get on to that, let's go and look at some of oh wow, there's been lots going. I don't know if you could see it popping up on your screen.
I
or
was
not.
trying to read them, but they kept pushing.
It's just going so fast. Yeah. And again, it's been happening a lot lately because there've been so many comments as the
I want
platform
to
has
say
been
hey
growing.
to Carl Wagner, because he did give me
Yes.
greetings at the beginning, and I appreciate that.
And Carl has had a great interview the other day. Really enjoyed that, Carl. We'll get you back as well. And those watching, don't forget that we've got tomorrow Matthew J. And I hope I pronounce it right. It's Lucio. He's got the Adventist History podcast. And he...
I just became aware of him.
Yeah, he's had that going for a good 10 years, I think. And it's a really great podcast. But yeah, that's Matthew J. Lucio. How do you pronounce that in the States?
Lucio.
It is Lucio. Okay. So Matthew J. Lucio tomorrow around 7:30 Chicago time, 5:30 LA time. So that's going to be great. So let's just have a look at a couple of these.
Broad topics there. So
there's some broad topics. I'll bring a few up onto the screen. Some will leave out. Boy, they are. I wish I could stop them popping up, and they shift along so fast. Rodney Smith has joined late. Hey, Rodney. Let's just bring up some before they pop. I'll just grab them. This is Carl Wagner here. This was the first major break away while we were organizing. The second would be SDA reform in Germany. I think someone was referring to the Davidian...
The messenger party is what he was.
Oh, right. Okay, right. Here's another one from 1981, 8456. How do Adventists define biblical inspiration with reference to Ellen White's? It's a good question.
Are they trying to say that we conflate the two, or are they trying to say separate the two? We can answer it both ways.
Yeah, I think both ways. Would an apologist say Ellen White is doing the same as a biblical inspired person would do, or are they separate? One thing I'm interested in your thoughts on is that as soon as you try and pin someone down that's an Adventist apologist to say Ellen White was a prophet, therefore was she equal to the prophets in the Bible, they always say, oh, no, she was a messenger, and it just gets confusing. But she claims that God spoke to her, What's your take on that? Was she a messenger? Was she, like, if someone claims to be a messenger, they can still be a prophet. They're just being humble.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why she was saying it the way she did. There are two reasons, and they are historically rooted. In her first book, Christian Experience, which was republished as early writings, her husband dealt with some of the early issues about calling oneself a prophet, and because it was not, as one of the folks in your chats here on the side has pointed out, there are a lot of things there was a milieu of things that were taking place, and so it was not absolutely unique to call oneself a prophet in that era. There were a lot of people within Adventism and outside of Adventism that claimed to be a prophet. Of course, Joseph Smith is one of those, and he's earlier than she is. But it's instructive if we look at Joseph Smith and we look at some of these others who made certain claims, but their lives were a little fast and furious, and they were not always moral. Joseph Smith was not always moral. I went on a Mormon chat and said one time, I think that the Mormon people are more moral than their prophet was. And they accepted that. That was a shock to me.
Yeah.
But so there are positive reasons and negative reasons why you wouldn't call yourself a prophet. Humility is one thing, but the other is prophets have a bad rap. The prophets that they knew in their day are kind of like some of the prophets. I don't know if you've got them in Australia, but we've got people that call themselves prophet so-and-so, and they make predictions, and they have followings.
Very big over here too.
Yeah, and they had that in their day as well. So she was trying to steer away from that, but there was another reason. She said, "My work is more than that of a prophet."
Right.
Now, if you break that down, you might say, "Well, what's bigger than being a prophet?" It's not about being bigger; it's about being different, because a lot of her work. This is some that I think a lot of people are unaware. She gathered health materials from different magazines to help James to publish a journal on health. She gathered stories about moral issues, for children, and shared them with her kids, but then they published them for people. Now, she's not claiming that stuff came from visions. She was a gatherer for that purpose. She, it isn't strictly within the job description of a prophet to do all the things that she did. So she's not wrong in saying that her role was larger than that. But to say she wasn't a prophet, that's kind of playing with words.
Yeah. And it's one that I don't think's fully been resolved within Adventism. I find some people you talk to and they say, yeah, she's a prophet equal to the prophets in the Bible. But when you try and pin down someone who even says that privately, they don't want to say it publicly.
Well, here's how a good friend of mine, Edwin, put it, and I think he's right. He said there are, even within Scripture, non-canonical prophets. Agabus,
right,
is defined as a prophet in Acts, but there's no book of Agabus. So to have the prophetic gift doesn't necessarily mean that you publish something that is going to be put in the Bible. There were lots of prophets in the New Testament that Paul commended. He said that prophecy was to be respected more than tongues. And tongues had their place because you can't spread the gospel if you don't speak the language of people. But he said, I would rather have you prophesy. And in the three different lists where he talks about the gifts of the Spirit, there's only one gift that's in all three of those lists. You know what it is? Gift of prophecy.
Mm.
So he listed different things with different groups, but in every one of those lists, prophets are there. Okay, so
Why just have one prophet then? If you have the spirit of prophecy and that's claimed as a general church that defines a remnant church, isn't there an indication or an inference that you've said there that the prophets, it's the gift of prophecy
that we
and the
should have
church
more.
that we should have more?
It's a good question. I ask it this way when I presented the subject: how frequently does God need to send a prophet? And the answer I put was a medical term, PRN. Do you know what that is?
No.
Well, they'll give you a prescription and it'll say PRN at the bottom, which means take as needed.
Oh, okay.
And so I looked at how can you find some kind of a pattern through Scripture? Is there always a prophet? Or is there always one? If one passes on, do you need to supplant that one with another one? How scattered are they? Do they cluster or whatever? And the only pattern that I could see was that every so often God had a prophet. In some times there were multiple prophets, like the minor prophets. A lot of them overlap. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel overlap, but they had different purposes. So my answer is, it is the Spirit who determines when there is to be a prophet, not in any kind of scheduling, and not because we choose one. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes that they always have to have a prophet. So whoever is their president would get the mantle of being the prophet. If that were the case in our church, all of our presidents would be, and Ted Wilson would be a prophet. But we don't work like that.
No.
We don't work like that.
Yeah. Now, the what's happening here with the comments is because there's so many, they get to the top of the list and they just disappear. So I quickly grabbed one here from Stephen Beagle's Gospel Adventists are less dogmatic in many ways, and people then asked him why he thinks that, and he said because they believe the law. You might need to write it again, Stephen. It's disappeared, but about the law doesn't save you. Saved by grace.
I mentioned this in one of my videos that part of my experience, even as a conservative Adventist, was this development within the church. It was called New Testament witnessing, and it was about giving the simple gospel presentation and the assurance of salvation. That's part of my background, and I came to understand that. And so I have maybe a little different view than even the gospel ones, and a little bit different than the traditional ones, because I recognize the value and the need for having assurance with God. Now, I don't believe in slam dunk assurance, which would be once saved, always saved. I believe that God never removes the choice that we have, but He is the one who sustains us. He's the one who keeps us. So the assurance is something that's vital and important for all of us.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that Des Ford is most remembered for, is creating within Adventists a sense of assurance of salvation that perhaps the more traditional Adventist has not traditionally had.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, I remember the resistance when I shared this with my friends, and they said, "You can do that?
Yeah,
You can have that?"
Yeah.
And so I was surprised, because I heard on somebody else's show, it wasn't yours, but there was a fellow that was interviewed who was talking about Adventists and the way they taught, and I said, my response was, I would have thought that would have changed from, because this is back in the 1970s. I was a teenager back then. Yeah.
I'm just grabbing comments. By the way, if you're writing from Facebook, please put your name in brackets or at the start with a colon after it, because otherwise I don't know who wrote it. They said, I think the words liberal and conservative are not helpful in describing the diversity and individuality
Probably.
of Christian liveness. And we both agreed with that earlier.
Yeah.
They don't see the two groups that clearly. Neither do I. Neither
Yeah.
does Kevin. We're not claiming that. Boy, there were some good ones I wanted to bring in there. They literally, aren't they? They're just bumping up. Rodney Smith said something about can't wait till you're back home, Peter Dixon. I think what Rodney fails to realize is that for me, Adventism was a cloak that had been placed on me that my inner true self would never have agreed to as an adult. So when I became an adult, I still stuck it out. I didn't leave till I was 55. I stuck it out, or 53, and I tried to be a part of it. I tried to make it work. I dedicated my life to music within the church. I was a full-time musician. 60% of my income came from singing to Adventist churches. I'd sing at liberal churches, conservative churches, and I loved singing hymns, so I'd just sing hymns at one church and I'd do contemporary at the other. But yeah, eventually I had to take that jacket off, but it didn't change me. So I'm just saying this to Rodney. I'm not coming back because all I did was take off something that wasn't me in the first place. So I went home by taking the jacket of Adventism off. There was a really good one by Teresa back there. Sorry, Teresa, it's bumped off the top. Okay, we're bringing up George Tishi. He's watching today. And he's written, there will be no order created in Adventism. Those who do not condone the fraudulence about Ellen G. White will not stay unless their character is flawed and they don't care about honesty. What are your thoughts on that comment?
George and I have talked.
Right.
We have a difference of opinion because, but I do recognize that we see the world through different lenses. I'd like to talk a little bit about the plagiary issue, if that's something that you would like to get into.
I definitely want to do that. I'll just go to the top end of the questions because we were dealing with things that were said back further. Let's just quickly bring one up that Carl Wagner said. Based on it, I have a developed program from my pastor called the Gospel Presentation. I'm not sure what that was referring to.
It's probably based on this book.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Someone else has written, Adventist apologists like Kevin says whatever is convenient in the moment in attempts to vindicate the absurdities of Adventism. I don't think you're defending Adventism that way. But
they used to say it's better to be obscene than absurd, but I try not to be either.
Yeah. I think in this conversation, what's great is people get a sense of who people are because we're talking so long. Barry Ford has written, Peter, you should realize most people learn theology from hymns. Fair enough.
No question.
Rodney. Rodney and I are friends. He's calling me home all the time. Peter, your whole life now revolves around Adventism. Yes. Prove me wrong. Well, easily proven wrong. I have several businesses that I spend more time on than SDAQ&A, 3 full days a week, 30 people sublease a venue that I run. And I do love my SDAQ&A platform. It's probably my favorite thing to do. But my life doesn't revolve around Adventism. 9-year-old and 10-year-old daughters, they take up a lot of time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Renee just got an A+ in her piano exams, which was great. Let's see. Rick Dingman has said, I'll be honest, I was born SDA, 5th generation, like I was too, Rick. Left for 26 years, and Christ came and got me in my screwed up life. He saved me, picked me up, and he didn't use Ellen G. White to do it. Fair enough, and good on you for following the path that was true to your being yourself. Someone else has written here, I appreciate Kevin Morgan's views. Boy, EJ Thunder's writing some great things, but I can't. EJ, we'll come back. Can you just maybe collect 2 or 3 of your comments you'd really like me to put up, and just put your name in before the comment, because I can see on my small phone monitor names coming up, but I can't read what the content is. And then on the actual program over here, it just says Facebook user. And Rodney, Peter, your daughter Renee still attends an Advent school. You just love us. I do actually. I do love Avondale's primary school and high school. We were there last night for separate to her A+. She was there for the annual recital that they have, and she did so well. Oh, it was great. And yeah, I do love Avondale. I feel like I'm Avondale personified. You know, I went to Sabbath school, Avondale Sabbath school, Avondale primary school, Avondale high school, Avondale college. I've got a deep roots into Avondale. So yeah, I do send her to the school there, and she loves it, and it's a good school. Okay, one more, then we're going to get into the conversation about the secretary, and Thunder is going to please write some of your comments, but put your name in so I know it's you. So I'll just bring one more here. Fred Simons, would you say Simons or Simmons? Paul said civil authorities are messengers of God. She called herself a messenger, and later more than a prophet, like John the Baptist was called by Jesus. She never called herself a prophet. Men did that. Yeah, that's good, Fred, and I'd agree with that. I think the main difference between what Kevin and I are saying is that I don't believe God spoke to her. I believe she thought he did, and I believe she did some great things. But yeah, I don't believe. Sorry, EJ. Yeah, you don't have to copy. Oh, you can't copy and repost the questions and comments. I think you can. If you're in Facebook, you can copy your own comments and just repost with EJ. Or if you can't, just don't do it right now. Wait till Kevin and I have just finished the next little part of our discussion, and then just bring some up, because I know you raised some really good comments there. We'll find a way around it anyway. Okay, so and thank you everyone for these comments. So I'm going to look forward to going back into Facebook and YouTube and reading some of these. Kevin, tell us more about this meeting you had with this lady. What's her name again? And before the break, we chatted a little bit about it.
Marcella Anderson, but then she married a fellow by the name of King after that. But Marcella Anderson was her name when she worked with Fred Veltman.
And you'd actually met Fred as well. So
I did. Yeah, he retired in the Carolinas, and he is one of the influential ones on me, because when I first wrote, I was kind of hortatory, just kind of punchy, you know, the critics look at it this way and I need to correct them. And he said, we gain nothing by that. You're not going to, and so I thought about it, and I had already had this experience with the fellow that said we should be liberal conservatives. And I thought, well, he's absolutely right. And so that was one of his critiques when he read the manuscript. So I went back and I wrote it a different way and thought about it a different way, in fact. And Marcella moved, as I said, to the West Coast, and she asked me if I would prepare a PowerPoint that she could use for a church there. And turns out she wasn't able to use it because the pastor changed, and the next pastor didn't need it. But I went ahead and used it. And after presenting it to a group, I thought, now that I've rethought this, I actually have a book here. So I started working on it. I didn't have the title at first, but I came on this title, White Lies Soap. And my wife liked the title, so I kept it. And a lot of other people kind of like that. It's a catchy little thing. Some people say, why didn't you spell lie, Lye. I said, it's a play on words, you know? Anyway, I sent the manuscript to none other than Walter T. Ray.
Wow.
And this is what he said. I have read the entire manuscript. You have done a fine job.
Wow.
And I talked to him on the phone.
Did you? I was just going to say, did you ever speak to him?
Yeah. I mean, he
Conservation
was quite elderly at that time.
What year would
And
that have been roughly?
before I published, so let's see. it was about 2012, 2011. And we talked, and then I sent him a letter where I outlined my position and the issues that I thought that he didn't quite understand, and sent it to him with documentation for every point. Some of the documentation he had himself supplied. He sent me 3 big notebooks of his materials, mailed it to me. So I organized it and cataloged it, and then read through it and included a lot of the documentation in the first chapter where I'm setting up the need for this book. I dealt with that. And you were talking with his attorney.
Yes.
On one,
Jim.
And that's Jim he's the one that contacted me. He said, do you have these materials? And that's why I started seeing that you existed. I hadn't.
Interesting.
I may have seen a video pop up, but I wasn't really aware.
Yeah.
Anyway, he read it, and then we talked a little bit on the phone, and he said, well, you've been fair to me. Or he said, I said, I believe in being fair to every person. And he said, well, you must be an angel from heaven. I said, no, not at all. But I follow the one who is from heaven, and I believe that he would have me to be fair with everybody. So I had a number of people in different issues that came up that are in this book that I wrote to them. I told them what I was writing about. I told them, what the input from them, and they sent back and said, you have not misrepresented my position in any way. I'd like to buy your book when it's published, So that's an important value of mine, and that is to be fair. But even being fair, I can see where something was not fully fleshed out.
I'm
and
very
that's a principle of the book.
I'm very interested. I'll just quickly read this. Matthew is watching from Advent History Podcast.
Oh,
Glad
good.
you're watching, Matthew. And he's just and Matthew, tell me, am I pronouncing Lucio? Is that correct? Did we establish that earlier, Kevin? That's how it's pronounced in the States? We think maybe. Send me a message. Send me a message, Matthew, and just do the audio bit and just make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yeah. But Matthew has said Ray was 58 in 1980, so would have been about 90 when you were chatting to him.
Yeah.
And Matthew has said correct, Lucio.
Okay.
So that's good. Good news. And Matthew will be on the show. Everyone, write that in. 7:30 Chicago time. What day? Wednesday night, 5:30 LA time. I'm getting good with the time zones. So we're going to be chatting about questions on doctrine. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Now, how do I move that off? There we go. I'm very interested. So you've kind of got the 3 parts of the Veltman. There's the full document, which is very involved. And he analyzed 15 chapters of Desire of Ages.
Right. Randomly selected.
And then there's the summary, which is about a 2.5-page document. And then there's the church's kind of public official stance, which is...
Do you have the new book that summarizes it?
No, there's a book.
Yeah. Let me grab it. You can turn me off if you need to.
No, that's good. You can hear in the background. I'm just going to read the church's official paragraph after the Fred Veltman 8-year study. This is how they chose to share it with the public. Can you hear me still in the background there, Kevin?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, good. I'm interested in what you think about this, because I think this goes away quite. There's two things I want to say
This
about.
is the condensed version of it.
Oh, wow. When did that come out?
Recently. Let's see. I'll
Who's
get
it
you
by?
2023. Yeah.
2023. Well, Arthur
Yeah.
Klim and I are going to do several interviews discussing the Fred Veltman report. So
Mhm.
I must. Can you just say what that was again? I'm just going to write that down.
Oh, it's called The Desire of Ages and Its Sources.
The Desire of Ages and Its Sources. Awesome.
The author is Trenchard, Trenchard.
And it's basically a summary. Is he an apologist?
He just condensed the actual thing. He used certain criteria to leave out the massive amount that would make it so much bigger. So it's basically the summary material out of each of the chapters.
Right. Expanded on a little bit. So it's not as long as the full version of the 8
Oh
years.
no, that's like 2,000 something pages.
That's right. Yeah. And then the summary is only 2.5 pages.
It was in the ministry. You're talking about the ministry article.
Well, yeah. Well, the full summary that Fred released is about 2,000 pages.
Right.
The summary that he also released is only 2.5 pages.
And that's the one that was in the ministry.
That's right. And then there's this is the one that was released more to the broader public of Adventists. And I feel like this is classic Adventist propaganda. They've gone, phew. That's my added word. The 8-year study of Ellen G. White's possible borrowing of materials from other writings for her book, The Desire of Ages, ended this year, with researcher Fred Veltman concluding that her book does contain some ideas and phrasing similar to those of other writers, but that it is independent of verbatim borrowing, which is kind of true. But it's a real something Adventists do that really annoys me. Is nothing to see here. After an 8-year study, no, there's way more to it. Now, you've spoken to Fred, and he did conclude himself, like he was an apologist for her, wasn't he? Did you get a sense that he was shocked by his own revelations of how much the borrowing and how extensive the borrowing actually was?
No, he was not surprised. As a matter of fact, he talked with Walter Ray and explained his interest. And this is what I told Jim, your other guest that you had talked to. That I saw this differently after reading through Walter Ray's documentary materials that he supplied, and having talked with Fred Veltman too. This stood out in our conversation. Fred Veltman did not go into the study with the idea, I'm going to prove whether or not she was a plagiarist. That was a side issue. That was not his goal. And that was not his interest. Fred Veltman was a New Testament scholar. That's what he taught at PUC. He was familiar with redaction studies, the comparative studies in the New Testament of Paul. I don't know if you took any theology classes in your studies, but
yes, but very minimal.
If you take New Testament, they will say scholars agree that this was one of Paul's writings. Scholars are divided as to whether this is one of Paul's writings, and so they will have those debates. Adventists tend to accept them all, but within the scholarly community, they do a lot of comparing, and they say, well, there's different vocabulary used here than in here. So he was familiar with that kind of thing. He was also familiar with the fact that biblical writers use each other. For example, Matthew and Luke cannibalized Mark's gospel. If you want to impugn motives, you could do that with them. But why
Except
would you?
they didn't claim, though, that God was speaking directly to them. And what's that famous quote? Someone can bring it up for me, where Ellen's saying, "I didn't, all these things I said."
It's in my last video.
Yeah.
It's-
What is it again? Where I didn't, not one of these things is taken from other sources.
I can
I
look it
forget
up for you, but
Yeah.
but and that's what I'm going through in this series right now, is the denial statements, because you need to be thoughtful and precise about what she is saying and what she isn't saying. And
Mm,
that's what I'm going through
right.
within their context. Okay.
So with
So as far as Fred Veltman, let me just
yeah,
finish
let's get
out
back to
that
that. Yeah,
what was interesting to him was not the issue of plagiarism, although that was certainly important to the church, but his curiosity was about her originality. How do you quantify originality? And that's what his study does. Walter Ray didn't do any kind of analysis.
no.
Walter Ray presented similar passages and then jumped to a conclusion. And his conclusion was binary. Either Ellen White got everything from between her and the angels, or she got it all from somebody else. And so, as a result of his publication of his work, The White Lie, there was a figure that was circulating all over the internet that said that she had borrowed from 70 to 90% of her books.
Mm.
And that's ridiculous. That's extreme. You
She would
have
have.
somebody in your comments who has done more work on it, and even he would not say that it's 90% of her writings.
Not 90% of copied, borrowed, but there's indications that there was 80 to 90% paraphrased.
No,
Really?
not even in his study. In his study, it was 31% that was paraphrased.
But if the claim is 31%, that's still damning, and 2% verbatim is. Wouldn't you say that's still damning?
You have to look at it closely, and that's what I did for a long time. Okay, let me see if I can show you this to give you some kind of an idea. When he's saying how original is she, okay, you can take two statements that two people that are totally unrelated to each other could say that are very similar in content, and they may have no relationship to one another at all. But if one of them read the other one's book, you could say, okay, they're dependent to a certain degree, but this is unique. What this one did with it is unique. So what he was doing was he was using a gradation. He put numbers to it. That's how he did it back in the day. I put shades of dark to it so that you can understand the amount of similarity. And so I'm going to try to hold this up close enough so that you can see it here. Okay.
Oh, yes, right.
Okay, here's the chart. Let me hold it up.
Other
Okay,
side.
over here.
Yeah.
All right. That one square up the top is the most similar, okay? So dark in this chart, the darker it is, the more similar it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as you progress down, it gets grayer and grayer and lighter and lighter and lighter until it's almost white, and then all of this is white. Okay, so what is all of this part that is white?
You're saying that's
independent. That's called independent. It's
and
independent.
not borrowed or paraphrased in any way.
No.
See, what if you bring in Marion Davis to this, though? Like, my understanding is that
Okay.
the Desire of Ages was really a compilation. Ellen just said, and she wrote it here at Sunnyside. Oh, hold up, there's the picture of Sunnyside back in the day.
Yeah.
Great book, by the way.
And
Marion,
it's a fascinating story. I'm an editor. I'm also a writer.
yeah.
And I had certain ideas that I think a lot of people would hold as the way that Ellen White would have done it. Because I assumed, I had this picture in my mind. She's down there at Sunnyside. She's got her little lap board, and she took a piece of paper and she started with chapter 1. Okay, with her quill pen. Only she
And
didn't have a
we
quill
were
pen.
sold that image as youngsters, your generation and my generation. I think that's why Walter Martin.
Maybe that's why I got it. But
I think that's why Walter Ray was so upset, because he went, "Hang on, we were raised," whether Ellen thought that or not. But just back quickly to Marion Davis. My understanding is she's got this compilation book. I don't care, that's fine. But she's gone to Marion and said, "Look, here's all the bits and pieces I've been pulling together." Marion pretties it up. My suggestion is that Marion pretties it up more than a normal editor. She pretties it up to the point that you did with the secretary of Fred Veltman, where it's so much so that she said, "Look, you've got to come on board with this. There's my name on it."
Except, and this is as an editor, I would have been absolutely frustrated with the constraints that were placed on Marion. When I edit for people, it's at different levels. If I've got somebody who's a really good writer, I'm just checking, I'm doing copy editing, make sure that they've got the right periods and the commas in the right place and spelling and references. Okay. It's their book 100%. I just made sure it was done the right way.
Yeah. There's two levels.
But there are others, like I got this one, and I hope he doesn't ever hear me say this, or he doesn't identify that I've done it, but English was not his first language, at least not the English that is spoken in Australia, England, and America. It was Pidgin English. And he was from Papua New Guinea. And so he wrote his book, and he had good ideas, but anybody outside of Papua New Guinea would not have understood it. And so I had to, in that case, I felt like I was translating his brand of English into standard English. And there were so many instances where I looked at it and I wasn't really sure what he was saying. I would just take my best guess at what he would say. So I coined a new term for that book. It was, I had trans-guessed his manuscript.
Right.
And that's, and okay, so that's the other extreme.
Yeah.
Copy edit to this extreme. That's not what Marion Davis did. That's not what
I think so. Ellen would have been looking over her shoulder every now and again, but I think she would have been going, "Yeah, this is way better than what." But it was still consistent. What Marion Davis did so beautifully was take the journal, the ideas that Ellen had, put them together grammatically correct, but also turn them into poetry. Like, people love Desire of Ages more than The Great Controversy as a poetic work, because Marion had something to do with it. People love Steps to Christ more so because of Fanny Bolton.
And Fanny Bolton didn't do Steps to Christ. She claimed it, but she didn't. It was Marion.
Right. So Marion.
Okay. So what did
I don't think Marion
got enough credit?
Yeah, but I don't think she was. I don't think she really cared about that, and I don't think she was rewriting it to such a degree that Ellen was upset. But I do think that if Ellen had anyone else, they wouldn't have done as good a job as Marion. Marion, I think, is a very unique, gifted person.
Right. And
I wonder.
She describes her work. I have on top of these books that I've done, I have an annotated Desire of Ages that I have done that includes the 15 chapters from Fred Veltman marked, but also all the other chapters. I haven't published it yet because there's still more work to be done, and I keep having other things coming up. But on the front page of it, let me see if I'll bring this up, because I do have it here in my presentation.
Yeah, I can bring it onto the screen. Just tell me when.
Okay, when I get to it here, it's in this PowerPoint that I've got.
Before I forget, while you're doing that,
okay,
did Marion know that Ellen had been pulling bits and pieces from these other writers like Edersheim and whatnot. Did she know that, or did she think that Ellen was bringing these great ideas together that were more paraphrased and borrowed from others? Did she
I don't
know?
know. I don't know, but I want to describe that because I had a crisis when I started working on this book, because I felt like you did, and I felt like it was illegitimate at first, and I thought, what do I do with this? And then as I continued to study it, I had a whole different view. When I put all
Yeah,
the pieces together.
is it possible? Oh, there's so many things coming through my head. Is it
Yeah.
possible that you, because of your love for Ellen, in the same way that people love Des Ford,
Right.
that you are going to blind to, like when I left the church, and I'm not attacking you for this. I'm just saying, is it a possibility? Because I know that that's what I did. If someone criticized her, I say, oh, look, that was disproven by Ramick, and the church hired a lawyer. I came out with all the right now, but you've gone deeper than that, than most people.
Oh my goodness.
You're not spitting out the jargon that I'm used to hearing. But
No.
I looked into it deeply at the time in the early 90s. And when I left, I suddenly realized that I had Ellen White love. Even now, I would have real trouble saying she was a fraud. I'd say she's false prophet quite happily, but I have trouble saying she was a fraud.
Because you believed it, she believed it.
She had I'd been indoctrinated so badly. So I just want you to ponder that for a moment. I want to read two things from
two comments.
Two comments, and then two little statements I want to read from someone who may have had rose-colored glasses as well. Then we'll open up your because that way we won't forget, because we've got it on the share screen.
Okay.
So Michael C has said, good to have you on the show, by the way, Michael, Cognitive Dissonance. Great to have you here. Ramick, I found that the charges simply were not true, but I had to get that from her writings. Now, Ramick, when we listened to James Wagner, who was around at the time and also an attorney and was the attorney for Walter Ray, said some really interesting things. That, of course, Ramick's a lawyer. He's hired to defend that. Of course, he's going to come up with a proof of defense for her. I don't think throwing Ramick into the argument actually does any good, in my humble opinion.
Most people are not impressed by it, but it does answer one very narrow question.
Yeah.
And that is the legal question. But that isn't what most people's question is.
No, and if you look into that side of things, and I wanted to explore that more with James, but we didn't. So I'll get him back on the show in a few weeks. He's actually already said he would. At the time, there were definite copyright. People say, oh, the copyright laws were different. They were more different in the total publishing of a book. Like you could publish a book in America that was printed in the USA and sell it. You couldn't put your name on it, but you could sell it and make all the royalties back from it. People couldn't copyright the whole work of something. But I'd love you to chat to us a little bit about Connie Berenhausen.
I have a book on that one too, by the way.
I thought you would. That's why I'm interested, because you're not just throwing out. You've obviously looked into it. You're not just throwing out the typical apologist answers, which I really appreciate.
And I can give you a percentage of similarity and all of that stuff. Yeah, it was.
We'll come back to Connie Berenhausen, because a lot of apologists are now saying, "Oh no, that's not even true. That never happened." And I think that's disingenuous. I'm just going to quickly bring up, before it disappears, that's why I'm kind of hurriedly going to the notes there, the EJ Thunder Lauriston, who's hopefully going to be on the show next week or the week after, has said, beautiful writing, but the sad thing is a ton of what's in Desire of Ages cannot be found in Scripture, and many things contradictory to Scripture. I think that's a good point. And sometimes not just contradictory, but added to. Like there's things in the Desire of Ages that are, I call artistic license. They did not happen in the Bible. They're added to it.
Sure. I have a whole chapter on that.
Yes. In which book?
In White Lie Soap. And in my way of thinking, it's unique, but we have different viewpoint.
And Michael Cognitive Dissonance has written no, so that plagiarism lawyer said it was not plagiarism or unethical. Yeah, well, of course he's going to say that.
Actually, plagiarism is not the legal standard.
Okay, tell us your thoughts on that.
The only thing that you can infringe legally is copyright. And there are such things as derivative works, and they were plentiful in the 1800s. A lot of works were derivative works, and they were not an issue. People could. It's there are a lot of factors that are different from than today, and today the issue of plagiary tends to be students taking somebody's entire paper that was sold to them on the internet,
Turning it off on their own,
and never doing any research and turning it in as if they had. So they, somebody made some money off of it, and the person who turned it in, if you ask them anything about the material, they wouldn't know. So that's a total fraud.
Yeah.
But we're talking about when you use materials from different people. Today we have standards of documentation that are different. That's probably the thing that is the most different, is documentation.
If though she had been just an inspiring woman, and I'm not even inspired by Mother Teresa because of some things I've discovered, but she's the only one popping into my head. If she was an inspiring person like Mother Teresa, 150 years ago, if she'd been transported back and wrote that stuff, copied, borrowed, paraphrased, used in the understanding of copyright in those days, I'd be fine. We wouldn't even be having a discussion 100 years later about it. But the two things, the claim of Ellen White, she's definitely selling it as it's coming through here, and it's going through here, and it's coming out here. And the second thing is that the church itself, and we saw these issues in 1919 when that paper was kind of revealed in the 1970s, the conference minutes from that meeting. We saw that they were concerned about this, but what happens? The church just proceeds in putting her on a pedestal and creating this beautiful myth of, she got hit in the head, didn't study much, but look, she wrote this beautiful stuff.
Right.
If they'd been honest in 1919, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation. The church would probably be a lot healthier.
Right. And that was the comment that I was going to say that Fred Veltman told me about Walter Ray. He described to him what he understood from the New Testament and how it was produced. And Walter Ray said, had I known that, I wouldn't have written the book.
Interesting.
Okay, so let's put on the screen.
Put on the screen, and
this is the front. This is how I would envision doing the Desire of Ages. Okay. I'll point. I make it look a lot like.
Yeah, if you wriggle it around, it gets bigger.
Oh, you want me to?
If just when you first point to something, just so. Oh, that's a good idea. There we go.
Yeah, there you
now
go.
We'll see the cursor. Yeah. Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to do an audiobook of the Desire of Ages, and I'm going to do written by Marianne Davis, inspired by Ellen White, and read by a friend of mine that's going to read it. But is it correct that the Desire of Ages is out of copyright? So I can just release it. I wouldn't release it as my own work, but I can release it and sell it as a. I
think the last copyright was in the 1940s or something. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, this is how I would do it. All right. The title, the subtitle, because it is part of the Conflict of the Ages. It's this series. Incidentally, the Conflict of the Ages was 3 volumes long until almost the end of Ellen White's life, and then Acts of the Apostles was put in, which is actually mostly sketches from the life of Paul, the one that is so questioned. That's Acts of the Apostles. And then Prophets and Kings wasn't even published until posthumously, the year after Ellen White's death. And so that completed the 5-volume set, but there is actually, you can see them online, a 3-volume Conflict of the Ages, because it didn't have those 2 books. Anyway, it's part of that. Written by Ellen White, edited by Mary Ann Davis, and actually her name is Mary Ann.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought it was Marian, Marian. It's often Marian when you look at online.
It's even on her tombstone. And the reason is because Ellen White paid for the tombstone, and Ellen White called her Marian. But her
Wow.
official name is Mary Ann. I've traced her back to her family, and I got all of that. In fact, I did the article on the the Adventist electronic encyclopedia about her, because I was fascinated. Anyway, and I put my name in there, annotated by Kevin Morgan. So that's how I would bill it. And the reason for billing it that way comes from, oh boy. Yeah.
You've done a lot of work on that.
Yeah, well, this isn't just on...
There's a whole PowerPoints we could do one day for an interview where we just go through the whole PowerPoint. And you can talk
Okay,
about
well,
it
then
as we
maybe
go.
I shouldn't go too much into it today. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. Just give us so
I'm
you could
trying to...
compile this and sell it, though, couldn't you? There's nothing the white estate could to do to stop you.
Right. I'm not a representative for them, but we work together a lot. Okay, H.C. Lacey
Just
wrote
before
this.
just before you read that, and I'm only interrupting because I know these things disappear, and there's some important things that I don't want to have disappear. I'm just going to quickly bring up, EJ has said, wow, now we have claimed that Walter regretted writing the book like Dudley Wright repenting on his deathbed. And when you said that, I didn't say anything about it, but that thought went through my head. It doesn't sound like Walter Ray would say that. Like Fred Veltman may have had
You want me to read from his own words?
From Walter Ray?
Yeah.
Or from what Fred Veltman said Walter Ray said?
This is a different statement, but he said, had they done that, I wouldn't have written the book. That
written
is
the book the same way, or written the book?
The book at all. Okay. What Jim was talking about in your interview with him, he has a very good memory of things, and I appreciate what he presented. But there were parts of it that I found from letters that Walter Ray wrote, and also the minutes from the Glendale meeting where they had first discussed the issue, and he presented his stuff. Plus, I don't know if you've seen this, but I was interviewed on a podcast in which we got Walter Ray's researcher, Walter Ray's stuff in The White Lie isn't Walter Ray's stuff. It's Bruce Weaver's stuff.
But that's just a research assistant. He would have said, look, go and pull that together because I haven't got time to go reading all the stuff. Because most of The White Lie is just, this is what Edersheim said, this is what Ellen White said, page after page.
And that's Bruce Weaver, not Walter Ray.
But that's an editor. That's just saying, hey, I'm researching like I'm about to put a little bit
Walter
of
Ray did not give Bruce Weaver credit.
Well, most people don't give the editor a credit.
No, if he's editor, but who did the vast majority of his research? Not Walter Ray.
He'd done many years before he was compiling the book.
I looked at his stuff from before, and it wasn't very similar. And that's where this thing got stirred up. Okay,
if
Walter Ray was comparing Edersheim to Ellen White's writings, and they're not that similar. I've got like 3 quotations that have a little bit of borrowing, but it's not that similar. What he was wowed by, and this is part of the problem, he had this false notion that that Ellen White wouldn't have something at all like any other book. And then he starts reading, and oh, well, she tells the story of Jesus' life in the same order as Edersheim. Well, of course, if you're going to tell it chronologically, it's going to be in the same order. And so the stuff that he was sending to Bob Olson at the White Estate, which Bob was receiving graciously and saying, thank you for sending it, was not that similar. But what happened was Walter Ray came to a meeting when Bob Olson was presenting it, and he read two of the two statements that he had been sent, and he said, "I don't find that similar," and it offended Walter Ray, and so that he wanted some notoriety, and so he was pleased that I was writing a book that gave him some notoriety. But the problem was at the time that when he gathered these things up, and it wasn't his work. In fact, I found a letter where he said, "Well, you can't blame me for all, for not doing my work as a pastor, because I got that from other people." But he didn't say who. And Bruce Weaver happens to be a personal friend of mine, so we talked about it. And then I
This is the guy that helped Walter Ray. Is Bruce,
he supplied the hole for Walter Ray.
and he's still alive.
Yes,
He'd be an interesting person for me to chat to.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so where are we going on this? What do we need to know?
Well, yeah. I think it's entering a land where people are going to loop over. So I'd rather go back to what we're talking about, your version of The Desire of Ages.
Okay,
because,
well, you can put that back on the screen.
Yeah, not that I don't want to talk about it, but I know we've got
Yeah, and it would be another topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so down here in the footnote, I noted the reason why I felt authorized to put Marianne as the editor is that's what H.C. Lacey said. It would be well for the clarifying of the whole question before the people of the fact was clearly stated somewhere that The Desire of Ages was written by Mrs. E.G. White and edited by Miss Marianne Davis. And that's the way he felt like it should be credited. So I think that's true. And we're in an era where it doesn't detract from the message of the book. At one point it would have. So that's why they didn't. And I have edited over 50 books. My name as editor does not appear in them.
Mm. Wouldn't that be the same with your friend, though, that helped Walter Ray?
Could be. But even still, when he was talking about it, he let people believe, by and large, that it's his work. He even let people believe that he was a doctor.
Didn't Ellen White do that as well?
Not when she talked to people, because she says very clearly, and that's what's in here. If I'll change some pages here.
Yeah.
Okay. What is it that's unique about the book? This is the publisher's preface that appears in every book. Okay. And what is it that's unique about this book? Is it that it's vision after vision after vision? They nowhere state that. We assumed that, I think. And this is what I'm going through in the other series that I'm presenting, is that if you go back to Ellen White's earliest books, it's clearly about visions. And so you say, okay, well then maybe that's what she did the rest of the time. But there's a break. Her first book, she says, I saw this, and then spiritual gifts. She said, I was shown, I saw this. And so she's describing what she saw. And there is contemporary evidence of people who saw her in vision. In some cases, she spoke while in vision. And then you can compare what she said while she was having the vision to what she wrote about the vision. And you can see the correlation between the two. Okay, that's another subject. But as time went on, she was doing something different. In the first book, this little thing, this is actually two books together, believe it or not. That's two books.
Mm.
It wasn't called a book. It was called a pamphlet because it was only 64 pages and 32 pages. Okay. Mm. And but we call it a book today, but that's not much of a book. That's both of them together. As time went on, she was doing something different. Mm. And this is what I don't think I understood or anybody else has understood. And that is that in time, she was no longer just saying, these are my visions, I'm writing them out, or these are testimonies that are directed to individual people. But in time, she said, I want to call attention to certain facts of faith in the biblical history and in the history of the church. And that is what she is doing with the series that's called The Spirit of Prophecy. That is what she's doing in the series that was called Facts of Faith or Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3 and 4. And that's what she does in The Desire of Ages, Great Controversy, Patriarchs and Prophets, and the other two. She's not saying everything here, I'm describing visions. She's telling the story, and she's calling attention to lessons and details that she wants to point out to emphasize certain things. So the question is, how do you graduate from this, just writing out visions, to writing a commentary with moral lessons and spiritual improvement for people? How do you go from that to that? And that's where you start to see where she starts embellishing by using quotations. But what you don't see is the whole process is kind of a filtering process. I don't know if you heard that heavy metals tend to concentrate in the bottom feeders.
Yeah.
Because they eat what others eat, and finally they get the scraps down at the bottom. So it tends to concentrate.
To me, sorry to interrupt, because
Yeah.
I think I get what you're saying. It's a good point. But the two things I think of with Walter Ray, for example, is he's not claiming that God gave him these teachings. And the second thing is that if an inspired person, from musician to author, you do see this human trajectory of simplicity, the small book and more grammar problems. They do put their 10,000 hours in and often end up putting beautiful pieces of work out into the world. Invariably, they discover other great editors like Marion Davis, or songwriters. If you listen to that song of mine, Never Be the Same, the guy who did the arrangement of that, I almost wanted to credit him in the song, because he does this beautiful cello arrangement that just makes the song. Without
Absolutely.
that cello arrangement, I think, not as good. And you can put the two versions together, one with just me singing and the guitar and one with his cello. So what I'm saying is that if God is inspiring someone, the 10,000 hours have already been done. Shouldn't Desire of Ages been the first work that came out? Like,
No.
wouldn't have been so impressive, the material she was given.
Because
Why would she have had to tweak the shut door thing? Why would she have to use something from Joseph Smith with the green chord? Why would she get it all so wrong? If God, this majestic 10,000 hour plus million hours being, is speaking through angels into her ear and saying, I'm giving you this beautiful, these gems given directly from God to me, wouldn't that then define a genuine messenger and prophet and visionary, if they're getting it from God, that the material given to them is just so beautiful immediately?
we get into trouble with what ifs rather than what is. And what I learned from Ron Graybill, which I followed his career long before I started working with him, is that he dealt with the what is. And so we worked together transcribing Ellen White's holographs, because we're both dealing with what is. And so what I had to do was to rewrite my script of what should have been, because I had a very simplistic view.
I'm not suggesting what should have been. I'm saying that what is demonstrates that she was a false prophet. I'm not saying that I'm looking at what could have been or what should have been or this should have happened, in my opinion. I'm saying because I see what she's done in a certain way, what is, I go, well, therefore I deduce that she's a false prophet because of the what is, not because of what I wanted.
And I don't come to that conclusion. And
Yeah.
and if you want me to explain how I looked at it and how I understood it, that I would come to a different conclusion, we can do that.
Yeah, it's funny when and I would like to do that. We'll do that. Let's do an interview where we unpack that plagiarism. You've got the great PowerPoint. We'll go through it if you're happy to do that, and
Sure.
then we can comment on it as we go, because I think it's more relevant to bring that back into that conversation. Whereas now we're just kind of having a general kind of view there. I want to. We'll have to end in a minute. Unfortunately, I'm loving this conversation, and a lot of people have been writing that they're enjoying it as well. And I just wanted to comment on Andy Mack. He said something that he's been, I think, last 3 months kind of working his way out of Adventism. And I just wanted to comment, Andy, if you want to talk to anybody, there's plenty of people in the comments you can contact who have left the church. If you need to find some kind of support there, you can write to me as well if you want. But back again to this idea that we started at the start, this view that if someone's kind of in love with a star, they write about it, they talk about it from a totally different perspective.
Mhm.
And so for me, and again, I totally respect that you've looked into this more than I have, more than most people. I'd say guaranteed more than 95% of apologists. I think more than George Knight, you've looked into this stuff. And so I totally respect and value the decision that you've come to, the conclusion. It's different to mine. When I came to that conclusion, it suddenly made sense. I suddenly thought, oh, of course, she's not getting visions from God or the devil or anyone. It's just in her own mind, based on whatever reason that her mind produced those kind of thoughts. And that then put all the other stuff into perspective. That made me see, oh, so when she's in Kurumbong, she's doing all this great stuff because she had a real heart for helping people. It's a genuine thing. She wasn't being fake. She had the money, she had stuff coming in, she could do it. So she was generous with that. The copying and borrowing, it's like, oh, wow, I can't articulate myself. Oh, and she stumbled across great people. It just, for me, when I realized that she was not receiving messages from God, everything fell into place. Until then, it was like deep conversations of murkiness to try and explain it,
Right.
justify it, fight against it, look deeply into it. It just suddenly liberated me from the complexity of it.
And once you have a
Because it
pattern,
shouldn't be complex. It shouldn't be complex.
well, writing is complex.
Writing's complex.
And,
Some people
and
are good
as
at it, some
and
people
as
aren't.
as an editor, I appreciate the process that is different than what most people think. I have a good friend who writes from A to Z. That's how she writes a book. She knows the story and she writes from A to Z. I have never done any book writing that's from A to Z.
I think
I may start at K, I may jump to back to B, and then I figure out how it's supposed to be logically, and then I get it together, and that's how it's produced. Okay, now let me make a statement that's piggybacking on what you said about the good that she did for other people.
Yep.
Okay, she had a heart for other people. If you are a communicator and you want to be an effective communicator, what would you do to effectively communicate in written form?
Well, I think the highest compliment someone could pay to you would be to say you made a complex concept sound simple and easy to understand. Rick Dingman has written, theology is complex, the gospel isn't. What I was trying to say before is that anyone that wants to impart knowledge, and they'll either be skilled enough. You've grown to a level of your skill by putting in the hours, or you'll stumble across other people that can help you the same way people stumble across you. They're coming to you and good editors because they can take your complex mind and make it seem clear and beautiful and easy to understand. But I'm saying at source, the gospel message, whether you believe it or not, as taught by Jesus in the four gospels, is very simple to understand. And it seems to me that Adventism hit to 1844. Jesus didn't come back. Something must have happened. one thing leads to another. Ellen has confirmative visions to substantiate the claims made by what's his name walking through the field, and it becomes this big reverse engineering thing. It's like, here we go, Jesus is coming back. That's nice and simple. It's the end of time, judgment, boom, makes sense. If Jesus came back, yep, I'd be saying, well, that made sense. It's nice and simple. But he didn't come back. And then Adventism enters this realm of confusion. And it seems to me that since the beginning of Adventism, no one defending it has been able to make it really clear. You're probably one of the first people that I've met that's kind of presenting the traditional Adventism,
but trying to make it clear.
Potentially in a clearer way.
Yeah. So my question is, if you follow that, then when you see what are the pieces that Marion, and I'll call her Marion because that's what Ellen White called her, that Marion drew together. It's a fascinating story, and we're about out of time. But when I talked about how the things concentrated, it's because she gathered the very best things that Ellen White had written in letters and manuscripts and all of this to bring it together. And some of those were a thought that she adapted from another author. Yeah. Now, what was her purpose when she wrote a single letter to one individual and used an effective illustration in that single letter? What was her intent? Was it so that we would say, oh, she's a marvelous writer? She's writing to one person.
Yeah. I just think that happened way too many times to write it off as an exception to the rule.
But why is she using an effective piece of writing to make a point with an individual? She's a communicator.
Yeah. Yeah. And
why do preachers borrow from everybody else?
Yeah. And comedians.
And comedians to effectively communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. But in a letter to someone, this is what I'm saying. These days, as opposed to those days, I don't know. But we wouldn't write a quote to someone without saying, oh, this is what C.S. Lewis said, and you'd quote it. You don't write it as if it's yours, especially if your claim is that God gave you this message to pass on even to one person. Someone just asked, have you, before it disappears, have you heard of the channel Test the Prophet?
We've dialogued, and I responded in video to him.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll get a link to that. So bring up a couple more thoughts there, and then I want to just close off with this idea of the people that see celebrity status in someone and how they respond to that, and how it can dynamically change people's views.
I'd like to just show you one thing on the screen if you want to call this up. If you give credit to every little nuance that she has in a chapter, here's an example of what it would look like.
But to me, that's damning.
Why would it be damning? Take a look at it.
Like, I understand why you wouldn't do it, because it'd take away from the purpose of communicating, like you say.
Okay. Now let me dissect what you're looking at on the screen. All of the underlined green words are scriptural passages.
But even writers would put that it's a scriptural passage, even with just quotation marks.
She's got it in quotation marks, so obviously it is.
But were the quotation marks there in Desire of Ages originally, or was that been added later?
Yeah, I didn't add the quotation marks. Those are original. Now, what
in the original printing?
Yeah,
of Desire of Ages.
Yeah, these quotation marks are in the original. What I've done is I've colorized so you can see what stands out. Okay, so I want you to see that in this chapter, the very first chapter, it is a biblical exposition on the incarnation, God with us. And I have a document where I describe how it was put together. But if you look at it, okay, see this word manifest? It could be correlated with another source who used manifest and had a kind of a similar idea. It's kind of a similar idea. Would I guarantee that she took it from that source? No. And Fred Veltman marked lots of sentences like this. And would he verify that everything that he marked came from that source? No. It's similar enough, though, that you say, well, it could be. All right. So the words that are red are verbatim. The words that are blue are similar. Paraphrasing, maybe, or maybe just the same idea. Okay. It uses so verbatim wording, similar wording, scripture. When you dissect it, and then it would have lots and lots of footnotes, but it would be boring and it wouldn't be a very good book to read. So when she originally started writing, she didn't put in footnotes because it's a lot simpler just to read. The point is to read. She says very clearly in her author's preface that she has used sources, but it's because it's convenient to be able to tell the history so that she can make the application. All right. So you have to understand where the pieces come together. And then when you think, well, how could she have done it any better? Would it have been better to have all of these footnotes? Would that have made it better to read the Desire of Ages and have footnotes so you know where the word manifest might have, possibly could have come from?
I get what you're saying, but I still feel that it almost confirms what I'm saying, that it places Adventism in a confusing light to the outsider. So if I'm looking right here and I'm looking back from here along a pathway, which ebbs and flows, ups and downs, but it heads back to the cross, and I'm looking through my back in time goggles, and all of a sudden something's blocking the way, and I zoom in and it's Adventism and it's confusing, and I'd just rather just push it aside, because it seems to me that every point of faith, every point of understanding the gospel, every point of what you need to know if you want to be a Christian is held right there in the four gospels. It doesn't need this other confusion. It doesn't need God coming down to talk to Ellen and say, hey, look, I didn't come back. I went from this part of the thing, sanctuary, to the other part of it. And here, I want you to start compiling these books to clarify this better message. I just think if God wanted to keep people looking back to the cross with the goggles of Christianity, he wouldn't have placed in the path this confusing mess known as Adventism, which to me seems just to be reverse engineered. Why not create messages through her that he knew that 150 years later or even earlier there wouldn't be just constantly debating and fighting and defending over? Why create a prophet whose message has to be explained and justified and corrected?
Well, because you
Why
don't.
not just point people straight back to the cross?
Yeah. As far as writing, okay. Have you ever seen a car like this? You want to show the folks what's happened here?
It's a picture of Adventism.
Yeah. So what do? Well, you get enough money to get a paint job.
Or just get a front end loader and remove it out of the picture. And then you can see the path.
But this is a good car. It's got, just because you're looking at the parts of it and you're seeing different colors, that's a mirage. You paint it all the same color and it's a car.
But and I would agree that people, if they look hard enough, they can find a version of the gospel that's pretty heartwarming. They can find camaraderie, they can find friendship, they can find all sorts of meaning in their life. But it seems to me that they have to look at the outside of the car, maybe take that door off, go in, have a look, open up, finally find the engine inside. Whereas to me, the gospel is pure, simple, bang, straight back to the cross. You don't have to, everything you need to know about the engine of that car is seen clearly already without having to put the car into all the stuff around the car. It's
If
already
you're
a
if you're not,
Lamborghini.
we're kind of going back and forth, and probably not as healthy for the rest of our those that are listening. But if you're working on my car, you're an auto mechanic, I want you to understand all about those parts. If you're working on my body, I want you to know anatomy very, very well. And I don't care if you're jokey. I don't care if you've got great bedside manner.
Oh,
If you
totally.
don't understand my body, I don't want you cutting me open.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a technical side that belongs to the people like me, the pinheads like myself, who deal with the technical part. But when I go into the pulpit, I don't bring these books with me.
No. You're doing the pure and simple, this is the gospel.
That's right.
I guess what I'm saying, though, if I was to sit there and listen to you speak, I would hear you speaking directly back to the cross, and you'd make it nice and clear and easy to understand. I just don't see any need for Adventism to get that. You can preach the gospel clearly and simply without showing the headlights aren't working properly or the side of the car's damaged or whatever. You can lift the bonnet up and say, there it is. I struggle. I'm not being disingenuous in asking this question.
Sure.
I just don't see the need for Adventism. There's nothing in Adventism that's not already there in the four Gospels.
Well, yeah.
And why is someone, I'm a lesser light, pointing you to the light? Well, don't be so confusing as you point us back to the light. Get out of the way. Turn your torch off. It's not working. I view Ellen as someone like a surgeon that's about to operate on me. I'm going, whoa, hang on a second. You're claiming all these things, but you're not revealing something clear to me like a true prophet would be doing.
If I'm talking to you about how to keep your health, I will talk in very simple terms. If I'm training people on how to do surgery for somebody who has a health problem, I'm going to have to be very technical. You want both. But for most people, you just need simply to know how to eat well and exercise and get your rest. You know, it's pretty simple. The gospel's pretty simple. But there comes a time when you need something more specific. Let's say you develop some issue that isn't fixed just by drinking enough water, or isn't fixed. Then you need somebody who
more of a
get
specialist
and deal more with the specifics.
I guess what happens though and we'll get off this because you're right. We're going to.
Yeah.
We've come to the crossroads, and both of us have made different decisions. I totally respect yours. So some people say, are you trying to change someone's mind? No, I'm not. But I would say with that example, if I'm wanting a specialist, doing these interviews, I feel like I've walked into the room and said, guys, I've got a unique problem. I need to understand. I've got a problem with my investigative judgment. It needs working on. Can you help me understand it? I walk into the Adventist room of specialists, and a bunch of people coming out, and they're telling me all these different things. There's no cohesion. It's like Adventism is like walking into a room of people who are claiming to be specialists. And then I go, hang on, I'm just going to step out of this room for a minute. I walk into another room of people saying, we're pointing you back to Jesus. And they all have very similar things to say, and they're very clear. And I go, oh yeah, okay, that's put me back on the track. I'm sure if I listened to you do a sermon, I'd go, boy, I can see clearly. You're that kind of person. Editors are. They take all the milieu and they make it clear. And if I'd listened to you in the 90s, I'd probably go, oh, okay, yeah, I can deal with that. I could remain an Adventist, and I can understand that. But having a daughter older, I suddenly couldn't put my name to it. But I just don't. As I talk to all these Adventists that are the apologists for Adventism, I just find it confusing. And a lot of people write to me afterwards and go, oh, if that's Adventism, it's just way too complex. And yet someone like you who's looked into it,
it saddens me because, I have good friends who have tried to defend certain points. And I said, oh man, why did he make it so complex?
Yeah.
Why did he do that? And he's a good friend. I won't say names because I value the friendship, but
Mm.
yeah, it should be something simple, and there can be a simplifying principle because the Bible has all these things in it. The cross is the crux, but but the cross leads to obedience. The cross leads to a sanctified life. The cross changes who we are. It's not just a pronouncement, and then we're just
Mm.
naughty people the rest of our lives.
Mm.
So there are some specifics there, and some of those things come through it helpfully. And I would recommend the series that I'm doing at the Warrensville Church right now. If you want to look at where I've simplified it,
Mm.
I do it. It's the 7 last essentials. So it's 7 essentials, not how many doctrines that we've got. I've got it boiled down to 7, and they're unique. And I take you to the scriptures, and I show you how that the scriptures do fit together and support that idea. And what is that motivating principle that's in that teaching? Like the Sabbath, for example, how beautiful that can be presented and how meaningful it can be and how rich it can be. Now, it can also be presented as a list of do's and don'ts, and it kind of is very miserable to people. But it can also be presented as a beautiful simplifying principle, and so can a number of these other teachings. And if that is something that you're interested in, check out our Warrensville
Mm.
SDA channel.
Great.
That's all I can say.
You're in our Facebook group, I think. If you
Yes,
could go into the conversation and just type a link to that, people can get that. I
good.
think you mentioned open-ended people, and there's different types of people
Right.
earlier. Someone said to me in the post there, how would I define the gospel? And I've often used this analogy because I've seen it play out in my life. I love playing the guitar,
Mm.
and so let's just imagine there's guitar players heaven, there's
Mm.
guitar players, and there's the best guitarist in the world, several of them, but let's imagine there's one, and we all look to that guitar player, and he says, follow me, and you're going to get to guitar players heaven. And so when I used to teach guitar, I would notice this: some guitarists would go, right, I've got to practice, I've got to put the time in, and they put a lot of effort in, and some would fail, and some would get better, and some would give up because they just couldn't handle the time pressure. And I've got to do it. I've got to be good. I've got to be good at guitar.
Right.
Whereas other guitarists like myself, I love the guitar. I fell in love with it the second I touched it. Oh, wow. And so I got good at playing guitar, but I
Mhm.
never ever felt the effort, or I've got to do this to get in guitar heaven. And the message that I believe is the gospel is that this guitar player that's inspiring all of us is saying, all of you guys, you've picked up the guitar. Some of you got it wrong, and you're being a little bit overzealous with your idea of how much you should practice. Some of you fell in love with it, and you got to live a life of loving the guitar. But guess what? All of you are going to heaven. And to me, that's the kind of nutshell. Whereas a lot of guitar teachers take this path of going, right, I'm going to impart to you this knowledge of the guitar gospel, and I need you to understand it. And and they go down that path of themselves.
A
So
good illustration.
I just
Yeah.
feel like that the Adventist apologists are like those teachers who make playing guitar a little bit like, I
Tedious.
can inspire you, but it's just tedious. They haven't truly grasped the love. And a lot of the people on the progressive Adventist side claim, I love Jesus. I saw Jesus for the first time through Ford's teachings. And so if I look at the lives of both people, the guitar players, those that feel like it's effort, those that just fell in love with it and away they go, I generally see all of them living good lives and doing well, and they're all going to get to heaven. But some of them claim that their way is the only way, and I just see Adventists as doing that instead of actually just going, look, let's just go to source, fall in love with the instrument, and you'll be right.
Yeah, and the truth is, you have thousands of hours of playing the guitar.
Yeah, but never once, ever in my whole life, and I started playing when I was about 11, Never once have I ever felt it was a chore to practice.
Well, to your credit, but not every personality is the same.
And those that aren't the same are still going to get to guitar heaven.
If they don't give up.
No, either way.
Yeah. No, as far as the
They're trying.
guitar heaven means being able to play the guitar. If you quit playing the guitar, you
but-
won't play the guitar.
But here's the thing: at what standard does one need to get into guitar players heaven? I'm saying the standard's a lot lower than the Adventist apologist thinks.
Okay.
I'm not saying that you go out and have a debauched lifestyle at
Right.
all, at all. And those who love it are going to find it easier. But there's those who struggle with it, and they play, and fine, they learn 3 chords, and they're guitar players though.
There are some things that you don't pick up like guitar. I was talking with my sister about her grandson in math, and he was not inspired about it, and so he was having some difficulty with it. And she said, I spent some time with him looking at his interests and showing him how that math could help him with his interests. So maybe the job that we need to do is, because not everybody's going to pick up the guitar, all right? But if they have a notion to pick up the guitar and then they start to give up on it, then we need to help them to find the motivation to keep on going.
Or the Savior says, hey, guitar might not be for you. What about this over here? Is this better for you? Or, you know,
Okay.
like to me, grace, the gospel, Jesus, God, going to guitar heaven is about falling in love with the essence of your passion for something. And, you know, you've fallen in love with editing and going deep into this. And I believe, yep, that you're going to guitar heaven because of that. But it's not playing guitar.
Actually, I don't love editing. I edit because it irritates me. And that's why I have to fix it.
Yeah. See, that can explain the 2 different types of people, where, you know, you've got to have it a little bit more explained, or it's just not going to mesh with you, and that's fine. My daughter, classic, she played a recital last year, and having only played for a year maybe, and she nailed it. Big audience, grand piano, playing all this stuff. And when she came off, she said, oh, I feel a bit guilty, Daddy. And I said, why is that? She said, I haven't even learned how to read the notes. She just picks it up by ear and plays it. And so whereas when I went to the recital last night, she did the same thing. I didn't tell the teacher, but I saw kids there playing, and I just, oh, I made a mistake. And they'd start again, and then they'd look at
Right.
and for them, they have to read the music, they have to get it right. So we're all different.
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes the Adventist apologist that needs to do it their way also says to those of us who go, man, this is awesome, I'm loving it, here we go. They try and control them. And that's why sometimes the progressive Adventist says, hey, the fence is a bit bigger, we're happy for, and even you said yourself, I'm happy to have conservatives come into my church. You want the inclusivity, you know, you've worked out a way to blend the 2 together. But a lot of us who have left the church or are on the edges of it feel like that the traditional Adventist apologist is very much looking down their nose at us for not doing it, the proper practice the way it should be done. And I just think I think the true gospel is Jesus, and maybe even Ellen White. I love when you meshed that she wants the 2 to get together. Jesus wanted the sides to get together. Maybe humans just aren't able to do that.
Yeah. Well, there's a quotation that she makes about dealing with the human mind is one of the nicest things that you can do. And the word nice used to mean delicate.
Yeah, interesting.
Because human minds are very different.
Yeah.
And so not everybody can look through other people's eyes. Not everybody is capable of doing that. And so they argue their point.
Yeah.
And they may be right. And I've had arguments. You know, some of the folks here in the comments know me. I've had arguments over something, and I've tried to be magnanimous about it, but I also have clear ideas of what I think is
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But can we? I can give people the credit that they want good things, and that God can lead them differently. They don't have to have exactly the same view as I do.
Mm.
We can have a difference of view, but for pity's sake and for God's sake, can't we love each other?
Yeah. A lot of people before I interviewed you, when I said that you were coming on, said, "Oh, you shouldn't. You're just going to fight. You're going to not get on. It's going to be a big mess." But that's not been the case at all. So I think we've shown that it's possible. Would you think though that if Sunday laws come in and I say, look, I'm not going to go back to worshiping on Sabbath because I just don't believe, my conscience doesn't allow me to go, the sphere and 7 days and dog legs on the international dateline don't make sense. I am not going to follow that path and keep the Sabbath. Am I not going to go to heaven because of that when that day comes?
It's not up to me.
Good apologist answer.
It's not up to me.
Hey, I'll just read this last thing and just get your thoughts on this. There's been a bit of a debate happening over in one of my other groups, Voice, SDA People's Voice, about Ellen White holding up her book. And I just wanted to close with this, get your thoughts on it, because it exemplifies this notion of if we think someone's a star and we've got a little bit of a skin in the game, we'll tend to magnify the stories, and not that they aren't true. Like, I no doubt Ellen White in this community here did incredible things, but there's other stories about her that have been elevated and mythologized, and I believe the one of her holding the book up is. And here's two accounts of that event. One that has led everyone in Adventist church to think it did happen, and therefore what a miracle, whereas to me I think parlor trick if it happened, and God's not going to be working with parlor tricks. So there's the two accounts of it. One's just a normal person. She's gone out to hear Ellen White speak. The other one is John Loughborough, who I think was the famous Adventist leader. He's got skin in the game. He obviously thought Ellen White's pretty special. So his account, I have to get those glasses on again.
There are actually about 4 or 5 different
exactly. Times. Yeah, there's several, and I knew you would know about this. That's why I wanted to, because it's hot over in one of our other sites. Okay. I knew you would know about it. That's why I wanted to run it past you. One last thing to get your thoughts on it. So
because you wanted this to end very quickly, right?
No, not at all. I don't know what you're going to say. Like, do you think she did hold the Bible up at 90 degrees for half an hour?
In one instance, yeah.
Not what they claim. What do you think?
I have more than one witness that testified to that.
But there's others that didn't. But
we're talking about different instances. And there's more support for some instances than for others.
So what I'm guessing, what I'm saying is that someone who has elevated Ellen White in their life, has been challenged, is going to go for the view that but puts her on a pedestal more than the person who's got no skin in the game. Someone who's been indoctrinated to love Ellen White, I believe this at one point, you're going to, my theory is that you will more likely lean to saying, yes, this happened, even though some were there and said it didn't happen the same way. You're naturally going to want to process, like people who love Des Ford. When they hear the good stories about him, they're going to talk. Des came to our place. We walked for hours, and what his health, his stamina. They're going to, magnify those things. Those who hate Des are going to say, "Nah, I walked into his room and I felt the presence of the devil." So I'm just suggesting that. Is it possible that
I've never heard that about Des, but this is anyway. Yeah, I saw him as a good Christian gentleman.
And I'm not meaning you specifically. I'm meaning collectively.
I've never heard anybody attribute it to the devil, but this is news. Anyway,
yeah. If you look at Dr. David Thiel, I've interviewed him, and he just told me the story, and again, it might be a story, but that's my whole point. Stories are weaved and woven around celebrities, and the audience decides to vilify, downplay, or fall in love and magnify. And I'm just saying the tendency for those who have fallen in love with Ellen White, even the progressives are doing this right now in some of our conversations.
Mhm.
They magnify. Oh, look, yes, look, she's a human. She had her flaws, but I came closer to Jesus when I read Desire of Ages. And I'm
Sure.
thinking, yeah, but that could just be because you're indoctrinated as a kid. Very rarely do people truly step back and go, what would I do if I hadn't been indoctrinated? Anyway, let's read the two things.
Sure.
We don't have to go on about it. We're not going to agree, but I just want to plant the seed of, are people drawn to something because they've already been indoctrinated to a certain level? And if you look at human nature, and if you look at celebrities, there's plenty of empirical data to suggest they do. So therefore, here are you and I presented with Ellen White's holding up this big Bible.
Mhm.
I lean to saying, nah, she held it for a minute or two, not outstretched, just at 45-degree angle. There's an eyewitness that was there that said that. She had no skin in the game. I believe her. But I might have coloured my view by that. I'm saying that guaranteed you and I are colouring our view because we weren't there, and she's a celebrity. So this is not a normal person you're hearing about. This is a celebrity.
I have this discussion with Ron Grable all the time. So
Right.
is
I can
because
almost hear what he would say because he's such a in the moment realist. You go,
but
whatever.
at the same time, when I look at everybody has a bias. Everybody has a bias.
Yeah.
But when I look at the data, I lay aside the bias and see what the data is.
So I
And
agree with you as an individual doing that, but what I'm saying is the data suggests that celebrities, where people are having to bring about data by other people, what people have said, what they've written about, sung about, talked about, what they've heard them say, their bias, their cognitive, their confirmation bias in a celebrity situation, not the average person looking at an issue, but when it's to do with a celebrity, and I believe Des Ford was a celebrity, Ellen White's a celebrity, Elvis Presley, celebrity, there's empirical data that shows that you will have confirmation bias for or against that person.
right.
That
You
the
look
facts
you
that
you,
the
you
facts
look at
won't
you look
sway.
at if you're going to reply to somebody on social media, you look at their bio before you answer because you don't know what they mean.
Yeah, yeah. And my other point is they won't sway from that position even when presented with facts that are the contrary to that. So here's just two examples. Loughborough goes to the meeting, skin in the game, loves Ellen White, probably an employee at that stage. He's magnified this to an incredible level. I'm saying he's just had a confirmation bias with a celebrity. This other person's just there. She's seen it, said, oh, this happened. She picked up a heavy book, held it for a couple of minutes. Anyway, let's just read the two, and then we'll have some closing thoughts. So he says, I will here state some facts representing her third vision, related to me by Mrs. White's father and mother, by her sister, Mrs. Sarah Belden, and others. So he wasn't even there. I thought he was there. Am I right?
Right.
He's not even there. He's getting the secondhand story.
That's right.
I was at a gig about 5 years ago, and there was a celebrity guest. It wasn't, not everyone was musicians at this festival, and this person was very charismatic, and the audience was getting very excited, and they went like this with their hand, and out of their hand they brought a little statue. Now I know that they just did a little magic trick, and I was there. I could see them holding it in the palm of their hand, and so many people that were there talk about this event where this person just manifested this little statue into their hands. And I'm going, well, I was there and that definitely didn't happen. But no matter how many people I tell I was there and saw it didn't happen that way. No. Because they love that person. They're a celebrity. Their cognitive bias there is so going to lead them to the fact. So Loughborough is hearing it, not even firsthand. So I'm even less likely to believe what he says now than I did before. In the room where the vision was given, there was lying on the bureau a very large family Bible, and weighs a little over 18 pounds. While in vision, she arose and took this heavy Bible on her left arm, and the book lying open, and held it out at right angles with her body. So I'm guessing like that, but in her arm, not on her hand. And then for over half an hour with her right hand turned from place to place and pointed to different texts of scripture, which she repeated while her eyes were looking upward. In every instance, she was repeating the scriptures upon which her finger was resting. Now, I read it that way because I think I've been in situations where I hear people, oh, look, and they hopped up on stage, and then out of the blue, they just manifested this little statue, which was an idol of Shiva, and they just, he's not even been there firsthand. And I can just see the ladies, yes, he held it up, and she held out like this. Was it like that? No, full out like that for half an hour. I just see that as being less likely to be truthful than this one. So this is the lady who was there, Frances Howland Lunt. The Teal family Bible weighing 18 pounds was taken from the bureau. It was held on her open hand at 45-degree angle. So like that, possibly using her elbow to rest against her hand for several minutes. That's it. And an 18-year-old girl would easily be able to do that. So,
where did you get that? Because I'm reading Frances Howland right here in front of me right now, and it doesn't read like that.
I'm just reading. It's got ... where they've left out some of her full explanation of it.
Oh, okay. Well, that may be why it's different. Yeah, Frances was there, but the same vision was reported by Marion Stoll Truesdale.
That's right. I've got hers here as well.
And the reason why Loughborough tended to believe it is because the very first Sabbath that he met James and Ellen White, something quite remarkable happened that affected him. And so he could not see it in another way. And
what was it that happened?
Maybe I should refer you to something because we're going to run out of time.
Yeah. We'll leave it there.
Because in my new book, which deals with her visions, I traced and found the individuals that were described in his account, and they were there, and it made sense that it was them. He described a miracle that took place. They prayed for somebody and they were healed. That took place just before the vision. And the vision described people that I've been able to validate. And so I'm a skeptic. Actually, I am a skeptic. And so it took me having to look and see, is there corroborating evidence? And I found that it's the Occam's razor is this really did happen, what he's describing. Now, you may come up with a different explanation of how it happened, but it actually did happen. This particular one. Now, the one that everybody talks about is not this story. The one that everybody talks about is what Loughborough talked about that was in it was the family Bible that's at the Ellen G. White estate. That's not this one. And there are 2 or 3 other instances that I've got documented that she held up a Bible that was just a regular sized Bible. It wasn't a big Bible, but she held up a Bible and she pointed to it. There's a story of a couple of men called Sargent and Robbins that were near the Boston area. You've probably heard that story.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that story is that Sargent saw what happened, turned away from it, even though it was remarkable. But his family became Seventh-day Adventists.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. But wow,
because I've tracked down the guy. I know who the guy is.
the guy that,
Sargent. His name was George Sargent. He was an Adventist,
but
and
he was
his
there
whole
when Ellen White had that
yeah,
experience.
the
So he would
time
have
where
been.
where he sent her to Boston, and she had a vision to go elsewhere, and they were there in the other town that was the other direction.
But the only thing about that vision, when you look not that closely, is she doesn't reveal that until she's there. She says, "I had a vision about this a few weeks ago that these two guys would be here." It'd be a lot more impressive if she'd said it a few weeks ago. I'm going to see them there.
No, the account is from Otis Nichols, and Otis Nichols describes that they were planning to go to Boston the next day, and she had the vision the night before that Sabbath, and she said, "No, God said don't go to Randolph instead." And I have been able to identify the homeowner. His name was Zacchaeus Thayer. I've been able to.
I'm not disputing when she claimed to have had it. I'm saying that she claimed to have had it after the event. She didn't tell anyone before the event that I'm going to see these two guys in a couple of days.
No, she was told to go to a different place.
But when she got there, she said to everybody, "I saw these two men I saw in vision a couple of days ago." I thought it was a couple of days.
I've never heard that claim.
Yeah, well, when she claims that she had that vision, is there a place in your research where you found her say this is going to happen in a few days, and it did? She can only write about it having happened and claiming that she saw the vision beforehand.
She didn't write about it. Otis Nichols wrote about it. And they were staying at his house.
But he's having to verify that she made a claim.
We better stop here because I think we're going back and forth.
Well, what I mean is that how did he know that she made that claim?
Okay, the claim that she made was that God said, "Don't go to Boston, go to Randolph."
But how did he know that? How did he know that?
Because they had to change their plans of where they were going. They were staying at his house. They were planning to go to Boston because that's where Sergeant Robbins said they would be. But she had a vision and said, "No, we're not supposed to go there. We're supposed to go to Randolph." And then, so they went there. He didn't know why. But when they got there, that's where Sergeant and Robbins were.
But at some point, he's chatted to her about it to know what that vision was and the change.
The night before, when she had the vision, she told him, "The Lord says, don't go to Boston." He said, "Yeah, but we've made plans to go to Boston." She said, "No, we need to go to Randolph." So they went to Randolph, and that's where that incident took place. And they had their particular reasons for not accepting her. And I've gone through some of that as well. It can be different reasons, but with the same evidence, some people believe and some people don't.
Yeah, exactly.
And we all have our own motivations.
And it makes for great conversations, and I hope that it brings about this concept and restorative power within the Adventist Church to lessen the judgment with each other and to try and tear down the walls a little bit. I don't know if that's possible, but nothing wrong with aiming high. Nothing wrong with aiming high.
I hope so.
Hey, look, thank you. It must be getting late your end. We're just getting started here in Australia.
Yeah, really. Well, this is long format, isn't it?
And it's been like we're starting to equal the length of Bob Brinsmead interviews, which went for well over 3.5 hours. So,
oh wow!
But yeah, I did 2 interviews with him. Hey, look, I've really enjoyed this, and thanks for your patience with me, and thank you for unpacking your research. And we've just scratched the surface. I highly recommend people get in touch with you. Just please put in the comments maybe a link to your channel so that people that are watching, and I'll transfer that across to YouTube as well, because I'd love people to come and buy some of your books. And I know you're not into it for the money, but hey, the more
my books are out of print, so they can't buy them.
Okay.
But I do. I put chapters. I put chapters on academia.edu so that they're accessible.
Go there. Awesome. That's great. And they can even get that link to your church as well and follow you there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciated our chat. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We had a big audience and they stayed with us most of the way through. So I'm impressed.
Wow.
One last quick plug. Tomorrow, we've got my interview with Matthew J. Lucio, and we're going to be talking about questions on doctrine. We're going to go deep into that. It's going to be fascinating. I believe that's ground zero for this separation of current days. Percolated in 1919, was first signs of it in 1888, but come 1957, questions on doctrine, boom, big split. I bet you know a lot about questions on doctrine too. maybe you can watch in and give us some thoughts. Also, when I do my interview with Arthur Klim in a couple of weeks, it'd be great if you could just be there in the background. I'll let you go and have a snooze. Thank you, Pastor Kevin Morgan, my very special guest today. See you next time.
Appreciate it.